We're here, we're live, and we're ready for fantasy basketball season to start. So we are going to be answering your questions for a very long time. Get them ready, get them cracking. We are ready to go. And Michael Bolton, he is here.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms, but you guys are here, you're waiting. In the chat, we are going to go live. We're going to crack straight in because Zach Hanshu is here to kick things off on this fantasy basketball extravaganza. Zach, how's it going?
It's going great, brother. How are you?
How do you feel that Chet Holmgren's stolen your facial hairstyle?
I don't know, man. I just got to say, I hope he shouts me out, man, for bringing this thing popular.
I think Chet is that sort of a guy that's something he would do, and he would be very happy to give you the credit for it and bring it back into the populace, Zach. But we are here. We are ready to answer people's questions, and the usual thing that I use to bring the chat questions up on the screen. Of course, it's not working. Why would it work? Why wouldn't you want to rely upon something that's you've used for 3 years? That would be silly. Why would I do that? So let's try something different to get some of these chat questions in with you guys. So I bring that across. Yeah, I have the wrong screen up. All right, let's try that one. All right, does this work? Not quite yet. This one does. All right. We are running live, and I am producing this live. So let's just start a question here, if I can just get things going. It's going to be tough to do. All right. Saha Soli. Appreciate you. That's not a question, but thank you. I appreciate you as well. All right, let's start off with an easy one. Here, we're looking at... that's not the one I wanted. God, this is hard to organize. This thing's just chatting along. Zach, I'm going to take it off screen because I do not know how to figure it out, and it just is confusing us, but that's fine. We will just look at the questions, and I'll ask them to Ian Solis, who I did say that I was going to answer his question. He says, at the end of the draft... Well, he didn't say that. I'm saying that. He says, at the end of the draft, do you want Jeremy Sochan or Paul Reed?
Oh, Paul Reed all day. I mean, I love Sochan, but Paul Reed, even if he plays, maybe 25 minutes, he still has a chance, to finish inside the top 100. Big time defensive value with steals and blocks. He can, get you 10 points, maybe 7-8 rebounds, and a steal and a block per game, maybe even a little bit better than that.
I think it's probably Paul Reed, but I feel more confident with Sochan and the minutes allocation. I think that he is going to be in a more consistent role. I don't know whether he's going to start at point guard or what he's going to do, but I feel like he's getting 27 minimum a night, right? Whereas Reed might play 17, he might play 25, he might play 14. Like I don't really know. We're going on a lot of conjecture from Nick Nurse, but I find it really hard to see how Pop goes anything less with that than Sochan. So that's a different sort of a scenario. Reed obviously does have by far the better upside. So when you're picking late, that is something that we're more likely to be interested in, is grabbing that upside play towards the end of a draft. Let's just stay on the last round discussions. Jorge says, Bilal Coulibaly or Dereck Lively in the last round. And my answer to this, Zach, is both. Don't leave your flyer picks just for the last round. Take them both in the second last and the last round, because we're going to do. You're going to take Kevin Huerter. You're going to take Harrison Barnes. My two go-to, I'm going to shit on you for being old and boring. Are you going to take Malcolm Brogdon? Just take these guys. Like, you can find DeAndre Hunters and even like a Sadiq Bey. Like, these sort of blokes will float around. Caleb Martin will have a hot little streak at some point. Don't just leave it for your last pick. Take both of these guys. Zach, are you in agreement?
I'm in agreement, man. I like Lively better. I mean, if you had to just choose one or the other, I like Lively a lot better. with news that he may be starting for the Mavericks, I keep looking at it and I'm like, man, he's got top 100 upside for sure. Coulibaly, we've seen him in the preseason just really look strong on defense. And Washington is probably going to give him some substantial minutes at some point this season, because they're tanking and they're going to try to develop their young guys. But absolutely, go out there, get your flyer picks. Don't wait till the final round. Both of these guys have pretty strong upside this season.
Yeah. Once you get past like where Steven Adams goes in a draft and Valanciunas, getting a center, there's no one, right? You're banking on backups. So that guy like Lively, who might play 22 minutes, but he might have 7 rebounds and 2 blocks with 65% shooting. Those guys just don't exist. Every other flyer is like a guard or a wing sort of a guy to see what happens. Like there's not those guys around. So yeah, Lively has that little bit of value in that area. And AB the ball fan adds on, is Lively worth a flyer in a points league? I think much less so. We want points leagues. Points, rebounds, assists is what you want as a general thing. So I'd much rather take a flyer on even like a Malik Monk, someone who can get hot and drop 20 relatively consistent, or Lively's teammate Jaden Hardy if Kyrie's going to miss any time. Like he could go off really quickly. That's what I would target in those ones, Zach.
Absolutely, man. That's like my man Tyrese Halliburton, far better in a categories league than he is in a points league.
Well, and that depends as well, because if you're in an ESPN points league, then his value does rise because efficiency takes on more importance. But in a Yahoo, he's like around 12th or 11th, around that zone. At ESPN, he might be 6th. And then in categories, he might be 3rd. Like it is a big difference between those guys. This is a strategy type question that I think is important to mention. I've got my thoughts on it. I'm going to let you go first on it. Amin Ali Jeramirli says, how would you build around Luka? It's a points league, 14-team league. Well, I'll switch this question in a second. In a points league, you don't build nothing. You just, who scores more fantasy points, that's how you build. Don't get it twisted when you listen to me or Zach or any other fantasy analyst or what you read and you talk about builds. It does not apply to points leagues at all. It's got nothing to do with it. There's no pairing. There's no building. There's no nothing. The build is who scores more fantasy points. So I'll get that out of the way. If I flip this away from your question, which we've answered, but in terms of building around Luka from a category perspective, Zach, do you have any go-to strategies with it?
Yeah, I think building around Luka in a categories league, this is probably not a hot take or one that's going to break any barriers here, but you're going to lean into the punt free throw build. Just like you would do with Giannis, just because that is his weakest category. You talk about a guy that is going to score, 30 a game with maybe 8 rebounds, 8 assists, but he's a really poor free throw shooter. And as we saw last year, and I know you've gone on ad nauseum about Giannis and his poor free throw percentage, and is he or isn't he not a first rounder? We could have a whole nother show about that entirely. But I think you definitely lean into, building around something that he's not strong in, which is just kind of throwing out the free throw percentage.
Yeah, you don't have to, though. Like, honestly, you don't have to. It might work to your strengths to do that, but you don't have to do it. And I think, I'll say this, and I've said it many times, but I've got a big audience here at the moment live. Building and pairing is unbelievably overrated. It is so overrated. And if you are sort of inexperienced, or if you're asking a lot of questions about building and pairing, you're going to put yourself into more peril by trying to do it versus not doing it. Because every pick you make, so who's the best pairing with this guy? It doesn't matter. I could make 20 teams out of taking Doncic in round 1 and 30 teams or whatever, and they're all different and they're all strong. So whatever you get in round 2, there's no perfect option in round 2 followed by a perfect option in round 3. Hey, the perfect option would be if all the first rounders fell and I got them rounds 1 through 12. Stop tying yourself in a knot about a pairing or a build or whatever. The ones you want to do, you want to avoid the bad things. The good ones, I can give you hundreds of combinations. It's the bad ones. Like, am I going to take 3 guys who are currently injured or suspended? That's a bad build, right? But everything else, if you hyper focus on, well, I've got these are my guys and these are my targets and I've got to do this, and this, it's going to screw you, I reckon, Zach.
Absolutely, man. You can certainly lose your draft, at the very beginning, like you said, by taking 3 guys that are high risk. Yeah, absolutely.
Losing or winning your draft is a thing that gets talked about all the time, right? You can have a very successful draft if you nail 5 or 6 guys who jump 30, 40 spots. You can lose your draft if you grab 7 guys, 20 spots too early, and 3 of them are already injured. But if you make one mistake, it doesn't mean anything. You can take someone in round 2 who plays 20 games and still win your league comfortably. You can. It's not easy, but you can do it, right? These things that we look at this situation, we go, oh man, I got 3 guys out this week. Well, I'm done. You're not, because it'll happen to someone else and someone else and someone else and someone else. And there's just so many different ways to do things that if you just narrow your focus in on builds and strategies and punts and stacks or whatever you want to talk about, pairings, you lose focus, I think, on what ends up being important on building your team. Atakan says, what do you think of Julian Strawther, who has had a big preseason?
I think this kind of speaks to the larger question of how much does preseason matter? Because we do see guys all the time that pop off in preseason and don't do anything during the regular season. But preseason is not nothing. It is something. It does mean something. And Denver, I think probably more than most teams in the NBA, is searching for, who's going to be that next guy off the bench. For me, I think it's Christian Brown. I have him rated very highly in fantasy this year.
Oh, yeah, you do. I forgot. You've got him like as a top 100 guy, don't you?
I do, yeah. Right inside the top 90. I really like him this year. But, yeah, I mean, they could turn to somebody like a Julian Strawther, who has looked phenomenal in preseason so far. I think there is plenty of opportunity in Denver, especially if you don't think that all 5 of Denver's starters are going to make it through the season unscathed, which – they're not going to. They're going to sit some games. So Strawther will have some opportunity for sure.
He has been great in preseason, but I will put it this way. Michael Porter Jr. has been out the whole time. But if we look at the second unit, right? So Strawther's been very, very good. And Justin Holiday, I'm sorry to tell you, it takes NBA teams a while. He was washed from game 1 last season. He was washed in Atlanta. Yeah. He was washed in Dallas. And he's looked washed in preseason here as well. But they will keep playing him because there's nothing a coach loves more than jerking off an old veteran who doesn't know how to play anymore. And the Mavericks and Nuggets have got a couple of those with Holiday and Reggie Jackson. But if you look at their bench, right? So Christian Brown should get first crack at being the number 1 guy. Peyton Watson, Zeke Naji, Reggie Jackson are all going to get minutes as well. Strawther's not coming and go, all right, boys, I got this. I'm the 28-minute-a-night 6th man. It's just not going to happen, right? He's just not going to come in and do that. Like I still think there might be a debate between him and Hunter Tyson in terms of who gets minutes. Tyson's shooting is better. Strawther's clearly outplayed him. But we just need to be really cautious because when we see these guys put up these numbers, it's because the starters are playing 17 minutes a night or not playing. And he's probably behind Jackson, Naji, Watson, Brown, I would guess. Maybe you make the argument he's ahead of Watson in the second unit. But if you're running as the 8th, 9th man as a late first rookie, it's pretty unlikely you make much of a dent for fantasy, I would say. All right. And also, just on your Christian Brown, I cannot get behind that in the top 90. But hey, who knows, man? Stuff can happen. All right, let's go to another question here. Warwood, what are my thoughts on Rashawn Holmes? Could he get some minutes? I will quickly answer this. I thought there was a chance he might be the starter. I don't think he's going to play. Honestly, Dereck Lively is going to start, and I think Dwight Powell will be the backup, and Maxi Kleber will get minutes. I don't think I've seen anything in the preseason that would suggest to me that A, Holmes is going to be in line to start, or B, get anything remotely close to usable minutes.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much to add there. I mean, if he ends up playing, it'll be a probably low teens, maybe if that. And at that point, he's adding no value to your fantasy team.
Yes. Question here from Big Doggy. What do you think Mark Williams' ceiling is this year, especially if Bridges doesn't come back? I don't think Bridges coming back has really anything to do with what Mark Williams does. Mark Williams is not going to be, all right, Bridges has gone, give me all the shots. It's got nothing to do with him. He is a he's a rebounds, field goals, blocks guy who might get a steal, who's maybe not terrible at free throws and might score a little bit. Bridges has no impact on him whatsoever, I don't think. What is his ceiling? Well, if he blocks 1.8 shots a night, it's probably top 50. If he blocks 1.2, it's probably top 100. That to me is the thing with Mark there. Or if he plays 32 minutes versus 27 minutes. There are plenty of people, though, Zach, who are very cautious. People think that it's still going to be a 24-minute split with him and Nick Richards. I vehemently disagree with that. But where are you on Marky Williams?
I'm right there with you, man. You know how much I love Naughty Nicky, but it's not going to be a timeshare. It's going to be the Mark Williams show at center. And yeah, for a guy, we saw this with Walker Kessler. We saw it with Nick Claxton. We know what guys that have elite field goal percentage and high block rate can get you. It's going to be a top 50 ceiling. That's exactly the range that I have him in as well as far as upside.
I agree. And Zach, your 15 minutes is up. So thanks for coming on. Go back to go and coach your kid in basketball and go back to writing for Roto World. And thanks for jumping on here with me.
Appreciate you having me as always, man. Take care.
Guys, it was great to have Zach on. We're going to get the next guest in just a second. But today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. We all know that sometimes there are things that we need to do to help ourselves, but your brain gets in its own way. That just happens. You know that happens. Therapy is a way to help you figure out what is holding you back so you can work for yourself instead of against yourself. We all, things we've got to do, whether it's work or family, social activities, and I've got to do this and I've got to do that, and you just don't do it, right? So working out strategies of how to break through those blocks is a way that therapy can help you. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And now I've got to bring in our next guest. As I said, we sit here as a self-produced live show, and I think the big fella is in here. Let's have a look. Double check. He is. We're just going to get the screen ready before I bring him across. But he is here. He is ready to go. It is, yes, from Roto World, again, Noah Rubin. Noah, welcome.
Gosh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here just to talk some hoops.
We are going to talk some hoops. We've got questions from people. Unfortunately, my on-screen chat thing is not working because why would it? Why would I expect things that work to work when I need them the most? That would be pretty foolish of me. But I'm going to read you these questions, Noah, and we're going to get through them. Aiden Vahidi, legend of the show, says, how are we feeling about Kyrie in a 9-category league? I was hyped about getting him at 18, but now I am not so sure. Noah, would you be hyped about getting Kyrie Irving at pick number 18?
I think I would be pretty happy about getting him at 18. I think he's kind of an early second-round guy. I know Dan Titus from Yahoo's very high on him this season. The injury in the preseason is a tad concerning. I think it's something to keep an eye on, but I don't think it's something that's going to keep me from drafting him early in the second round. So I think 18 is great value.
The injury is a little bit of a worry. It's not impacting how I'm drafting him. My worry for him is that he's got a 2-game week in the fantasy playoffs. Depending on when your playoffs are, if it's when I suggest to end on March 24th, it's the finals week. If it's Yahoo default, it's first week of playoffs. That's a bit of a concern to me. 18, though, is good value. I think he's probably I would have taken him like 12, 13 if I'd take him ahead of probably Trey or Devin Booker if he didn't have that 2-game week and I wasn't marginally concerned about the groin. I also worry about we saw a bit of a decline in some of the numbers playing alongside Luka last season. We only got like 10 or whatever games out of it, so it's hard to know completely, but 18 feels very, very reasonable for me to get him there. Daddy Hassan says, what is going on with James Harden? Is he going to play? We'll start with that one, Noah. Is he going to play, do you think?
I don't think anybody knows the exact answer to that question. I'd like to say he does play basketball this season. Where? I don't know. I'd think a trade just kind of happens at some point, but it wouldn't be surprising if Daryl Morey waited until the trade deadline. That's what he did with Ben Simmons to hopefully maybe get a little bit of a better offer. But yeah, that's the biggest unknown. I have no idea.
I agree. I don't. Even if he does play, right, we don't know how he's going to play, how much effort he's going to give if he plays. Like, they are all the uncertainties. Like, is he going to be out there? I actually would say yes, but what level of Harden are we going to get? But nothing seems to be going on at the moment. I would feel like the odds of Harden being close to James Harden from last season by the time we hit February are pretty high. So if you're taking him at pick 30, right, it might be rough early on. But I would almost say Noah, even if he's going like and playing annoyingly in Philadelphia, is that like almost floor value? And then if he actually cranks it up, you might get a top 15 guy for the final 2 months of the season, or he just outperforms it from day one. Once he starts falling into round 3, I don't see a huge downside. I don't think he's just not going to play.
Right. I think taking him in round 3 is probably where you need to take him. That's not too risky. I ended up getting him in the World Cup late in the second round because I fell asleep without a cue. Big rookie mistake by me. But I still think even if he is pouting to try and get out of Philly and playing, taking him in the third round is fine. It might not be quite third round value, but by the time he's happy and playing, which I imagine by February, like you said, he is, then you're going to be getting better than top 30 value. So you just need to kind of survive until that point.
Jorge, I don't know if this is the same Jorge from earlier, but it doesn't matter because I like the question. How do you revalue Ja Morant if there is an IL plus spot? Well, any time that I would talk about Ja Morant this season, it would be under the assumption that you use IL plus, because I assume if you were listening to my show, you also listen to my show when I say, please never ever use IL and always use IL plus. There is zero reason to use IL. Yes, I know in Yahoo Public Leagues they have IL because, again, they don't listen, but you should have IL plus. Now, the value of having Ja in your injured reserve is fine. It's question's going to differ here, Noah, also if it's a points league, because if it's a points league, Ja's a top 15 player. If it's a category league, he's barely touching the sides of a top 50 because of some of his downsides. So if I'm in a category league and I've got IL plus, I'm looking at him in the 90s probably. If I'm in a points league, I'm looking at him at around the 50s or 60s because I've still got to take 25 games of zeros and I'm replacing him with a waiver wire caliber player. But in a points league, that upside is so high that you do roll the dice early. But in a category league, the upside's not that high. It's not that good. And that's also, we're saying minimum 25 games missed. Where do you roll it on Ja?
I like the ranges that you kind of said, like 90s for category leagues, around 50s for points league, because like you said, 25 games, that's a lot. It's kind of hard to keep up after missing that many games. But I think he's practicing with the team. That's what the reports are saying. So I think after the 25 games, he should be able to hit the ground running rather quickly. Hopefully that extra rest is able to keep him healthy once he's able to play, once he's done with the suspension. So I think keeping him on the IL plus spot, I think it just kind of changes how you draft a little bit. Probably have to draft a little bit safer, less upside swings at the end of the draft because you're going to be without a guy like that for a third of the season. And then when he comes back, hopefully you've just, like I said, like with Harden, just got to survive until then.
Yellow Mamba says, can we see some recent hat or shoe purchases? I don't have them with me. I've got some hats here, but they're the ones I showed you when Dan was in the day, like the El Paso Margaritas and the Storm and the Aviators. Shoes, what recent shoes I got the Albino and Preto SB Dunks, but they're downstairs. I can't go and get them midstream. And I got the Travis Scott MX1 Baroque Brown. Got those there for my son for Christmas. But they're the ones that I've got recently. But I don't have them with me. All right, what are we doing here? What question are we going to do next? Camus on what categories are usually paired together, etc. When punting steals, what categories should I be looking to get? It's a really good question, Camus. I wrote a whole article about this on Basketball Monster, and I did a whole show on this on correlations. The three categories that get pushed together, the easiest is rebounds, blocks, and field goal percentage. They will always come together. So they're always those ones you want to look at. The other things that we look at is points and assists do marry together pretty closely as well. Threes and free throw percentage usually tie together pretty quickly also. Often when you are punting a category, Noah, like if you are punting blocks, I believe you need to prioritize getting rebounds and field goal percentage. You need to get those early because the other categories, you tend to be able to, you look at your value of players, they will rise up and you can just grab those guys later. But otherwise, if you start punting blocks and you don't focus on rebounds and, say, field goal percentage, you will just find yourself punting three categories. That's why Domantas Sabonis in round 2 is an amazing guy to grab when you're punting blocks because he's got no value in the blocks category. He gives you out-of-position assists and he gives you rebounds and field goal percentage, which are the categories. So it seems counterintuitive, but if you're punting a big man stat, you got to get some bigs early on.
Yeah, I would agree with that, definitely. I think also it's not a bad idea to just kind of lean in and punt multiple big man stats. It might be a little bit more risky, but I think a guy like Wendell Carter Jr. is probably a guy that if you lean in and punt, rebounds, blocks, and field goal percentage, he's a center that can still provide some solid value without really dominating those three categories that you can get kind of in the later rounds.
Andoni Eduave says, Hi guys, how confident are you that Jalen Johnson takes over from Saddiq Bey or starts next to Bey? I'll let you handle that one first, Noah.
I'm not confident that he starts the season in the starting unit. I think it's still going to be DeAndre Hunter, Saddiq Bey, Clint Capella. I think as the season progresses, if Jalen Johnson's playing well and Saddiq Bey is just so much of a traffic cone on defense that they just kind of need to make a change, then Jalen Johnson can move into the starting unit. I don't think he'll start alongside Saddiq Bey. I think having DeAndre Hunter, even if he's not good for fantasy basketball, as the primary defender on the opposing team's best scorer, he's too valuable there because of Trey Young being more of a liability and DeJounte Murray just being more of a steals guy than an actual lockdown defender. So could Jalen Johnson take over for Saddiq Bey later in the season? Maybe. I just don't think he starts from day one.
Yeah, look, the question here, how confident are you? Not very. I think it's possible. I think he has shown DeAndre Hunter hasn't played, but Johnson has looked way better than Bey in the preseason. But that doesn't mean everything, right? That doesn't mean that that's the direction they're going to go. If I was putting money on it, Johnson wouldn't be starting opening night. That's not how I would view it. And I've got him maybe at 19 minutes a night or something. But I do think that sometimes you have to put a bit of a bet. You either bet on talent or you bet against lack of talent. So when I made this mistake last season, was like, Jalen Smith's the starting power forward. I go, I think this guy's shit, but he's going to start. And then talent won out, or lack of talent lost out. And that's sort of where I feel with Saddiq Bey, a 3-and-D wing who's not a good three-point shooter nor a good defender. Like at some point, they're just going to be bro, what is this guy doing? Like we need to do something else here. And Johnson's killing it in a reserve role. But for fantasy, sometimes that can take 3 months to get there. Tari Eason, a great example last season as well. Like, why is this guy sitting here playing 20 minutes a night when he should be getting 26? Well, sometimes it just doesn't happen, even though we can see the value in it. So confident? No, I'm not confident in it at all. But I'd be drafting him just to see, and then we evaluate it as it goes on. All right. Here's a question that I get a lot. It's good to see a lot of people in here, either new people or old people who are watching the show, but there are people who are just getting ready for their fantasy drafts, and I've just lost the question. But the question was, I apologize to the man who asked it. It was like, how confident are you in LaMelo Ball bouncing back from injury? And Noah, I'll say, I don't care. Like, yeah, he got injured. Oh, well. I will factor that in, not a single part in a draft. You know how many people got injured last season? Lots of them. Like, I'm not looking here and going... And also, this is something that is amazing to me, is that people see that and LaMelo got hurt. He played 75 games the year before that. Like, he never stays healthy. Oh, cool, except he just did a year ago. So I don't care that he got his ankle sprained 3 times. It doesn't bother me in the slightest.
Not at all. I think it was kind of crazy that it was, I believe, the same ankle 3 times that he injured, which not ideal for him, but I'm not concerned about that at all. He's had an off season to heal, a lot of time to heal because played 33 games last year. So no, I'm taking the first round. No concerns about the ankle.
Yeah, absolutely none for me, which is fine. And he might get hurt again. The other thing I found out, and I think I mentioned this in the show, do you know that I think 2 years ago Zion Williamson played 65 games or 61 games out of 72, which, hey, hang on. Just complete breaking news here. I got my little thingo to work, the chat question thing to work. I think we're rolling. Let's go. All right. Would you rather have... There it is. Would you rather have Jalen Green or Keldon Johnson in a category league at the moment? 2 guys notoriously bad at category leagues. But this is a good question, Noah. What do you think?
This is pretty easily Jalen Green for me. Keldon Johnson, we don't know if he's going to start. I imagine he will, even if it isn't probably the best choice. I still think he starts. But Jalen Green's going to have a chance to be the leading scorer in Houston, have a pretty open green light, can do a little bit more, provide a little bit more in different categories than Keldon Johnson can. I think Jalen Green pretty easily.
I think Jalen Green pretty easily as well. I haven't been super impressed with his preseason, and I'll put it out this way. I went on Salman Ali's Rockets podcast yesterday. We were talking about Jalen Green. He still thinks he's going to be a star, but we're not really looking at we're not expecting necessarily a huge breakout this season. And I posited this to him, and he didn't 100% disagree with it. I said, I could see a situation where Green sort of just middles around and struggles in some other areas where Amen Thompson starts really cutting in, because I'm of the belief that Amen Thompson's by far the best prospect on this team. And I think at some point he's just going to show that he's too good to be sitting and playing 19 minutes a night. And I don't think Fred VanVleet's going to the bench, and I'm not sure that Dylan Brooks will either. So I don't think that's going to happen, right? But I can't rule that out. I can't say, well, there's absolutely no chance. Green's going to absolutely blow up. I still would have him over Keldon. He's by far a better player than Keldon Johnson, but I'm not going to rule that out. Last question before you go, Noah. Pat G says, how many leagues do you think are too many to play in? What do you think?
I think it just depends on the person. If you have time to sit there and manage 25 fantasy rosters all day, every day, because that's kind of what it takes, then go for it. For me, I try and do between 5 and 10, some dynasty, some redraft, just so I can manage everything and feel like I'm active in the league. But if you're confident playing in leagues where you can do your draft and keep up with in-season roster management for 25 plus 50 leagues, go for it.
My problem with this question is coming from my own perspective. I used to play probably 12, 13 a year. I had to cut back, so it's probably 5 or 6 for me. But my issue that I always realized I had an issue with trying to keep up to date and make all the moves and all that sort of stuff since I started doing this job. And I've realized now what that issue is that in the past, I would know who is on my team, right? I'm playing in these 10 leagues before I did this as a job and which players I've got, who's available. But now, because I have to know the comings and goings of every single player in the NBA on every day, I don't know which one is on my team. I don't know who I've got in what position because I have to know every single player and what they're doing. So everything running in my head is what everyone's doing versus like, well, I've got these 12 guys on 13 guys on one team. I've really got to hyper focus on them. So for me, the number has come way down. If you're not having to focus that way, then you can probably play a little bit more. But you know, the ideal number for me would be 3. I'm never going to do that because of the job that I'm in. But 3, I think, is a very easily manageable number to cover. Noah, thank you. Fantastic to have you on, answer these questions. Go back and do your Roto World stuff, and we'll chat during the season. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Josh. Thank you.
Today's episode is also brought to you by the Game Time app. You shouldn't have to worry about buying tickets to your next event. It should be an easy process. Getting the tickets for sports or music or comedy or theater or whatever it is, why worry? With last-minute deals, killer last-minute deals, in fact, all-in prices, views from your seat, and best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Let's talk about their all-in pricing, because you go onto a ticket website and you'll see the price for a ticket and you go, that looks pretty good, I'm happy with that price. And you go there and they go, oh, here, processing fee, transaction fee, environmental fee, protection fee, services fee. Like, bro, like, just tell me the price. All-in price does that. The price that you see is the price that you pay. Nothing's hidden. It is all in, as the name all-in price would suggest. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Now I will go across and find my next guest. Hopefully he is ready to go. I'm not going to spoil it, although, you know, I don't think it's too much of a surprise. Let's see if he is out here and ready. He is here. We are, as I wait for him to come up on the screen, we are joined by the man himself from Yahoo Sports. It is Dan Titus. Dan, welcome.
Josh, what's up, man? How you doing?
It is good. We are rolling through this. Guest number 3, you are here, and we are ready to talk fantasy basketball. All right, let's find a good question for you. This guy from Costa says Tyrese Halliburton failed me to pick 10 in his category league. Is that a steal? Yes, you know it's a steal. You just want me to tell you how well you did. So congratulations to you for doing so well. All right, let's find another question here. Jose Hernandez. This takes us back into the James Harden question. I want to get your opinion. I've already answered it. Should you take Harden or Cade in round 3? Harden, we're dealing with uncertainty whether he plays. Cade, we're dealing with uncertainty whether he can reach this level. So it's a debatable thing. What would you do, Dan, in that spot?
I would take Cade because I at least see more upside in terms of the situation that he's in. James Harden, even though he's reportedly in shape, he's committed right now. I feel like this could just go left super quick. Whether he goes out, I remember when he played for Houston, he dropped 40, and then next thing you know, he started sandbagging. So I'd be more concerned about that than I am about Cade trying to make that third-year breakout and potentially becoming an all-star with what we've seen over the summer and just the things that the Detroit Pistons have done to put more support around him. This is one of my favorite teams that's going to be ascending this year. So I'd much rather take the risk of Cade being great than James Harden falling off the map and sandbagging it again.
I think part of that, to me, Dan, is also depending on what I've done in the first couple of rounds as well.
Sure.
Say I grabbed Kawhi at the end of round 2. then do I want to put Kawhi and Harden together in that spot when there's risk with both? What if they end up on the same team? What does that do to both? Do you know what I mean? I'd be a little bit more cautious. Or did I take Anthony Davis in round one? Like, I feel a bit more confident in taking Cade later on. So I think some of that is there. But I generally think that I would feel if I had resolution about Harden, I go, well, he's committed, he's playing. I would take Harden over Cade without any question, right? But I don't, so I probably would lean into Cade there. Femi says, do you go into draft night with a plan? And if yes, what exactly do you note down? Dan, do you have a plan, a specific thing that you do? Do you write notes? How do you approach that?
Yeah, my plan is typically to target points and assists as early as possible. I see a lot of value in getting bigs late this year, mid rounds, anywhere from 5 to 9. That's usually the cutoff, or else you're going to end up with the, Jonas Valanciunas of the world and the Steven Adams and such. So, with so much points and assists concentrated at the top, I try to get that because those tend to get more scarce, as I know that you've already done your homework on that and have several tutorials on why that's important, especially for head-to-head leagues or category leagues, excuse me. Outside of that, I don't really go in with a punting strategy unless I end up with someone like Giannis Antetokounmpo or someone that, obviously has a deficiency amongst all the rest of their production. But I try not to punt if at all possible.
Do I go in with a plan? Again, it is hard. It's like me answering that question I said before about how many leagues do you play in. Do I go in with a plan? Not really, because I do this 15 hours a day. So I've got an understanding of how every player works at every position and where they all go and how all this. So I don't necessarily have to plan that. In an auction, sometimes I will, but I might plan it against average price, and then guys start going $10 more, $10 less. And my ability is and part of the thing I try to preach a lot is understandings and flexibilities, not like you must go in with this idea. And this ties back into what I discussed earlier about pairings and builds, and don't hyper-focus on it. If you have to continually ask the question about who the best pairing is, don't do it. Don't pay that attention to it, because you will put yourself into such a narrow focus that you will end up making an incorrect decision, grabbing a guy at the wrong spot and eliminating value. When in the end, Dan, maybe you agree or disagree, I don't know, but in the end, to me, having a successful draft or having the way to push yourself to success through the draft is by getting a guy who hits 30, 40 spots better than where you pick him. Now, whether that can be through punting value or whatever, it's not about reaching for the guy that fits. It's about if you get this guy who blows up, Larry Markin and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nick Claxton last season, that's the key, right? That trumps all those other things.
Yeah, and I think that the risks that those high-end risks that I try not to take the risks earlier on. Mm-hmm. Save that for, rounds 8 through the rest of it. I think that's when you can take your high value swings to say, hey, okay, this guy's going to outperform his ADP by, 20, 30 spots. Like, once you already have your foundational core that hopefully wasn't built off of see, my problem with punting is that I feel like you leave value on the board because you're trying to fit a specific situation. And I think you limit yourself when you do that. So take your swings later. Don't worry about it for trying to get the best fit amongst all your players in the beginnings of the draft.
I'll push back a little bit on that with the punting, but you are right. If you don't do it correctly, that does lead to that. And that's often what people can do. They'll be like, well, I'm actually punting free throws here, so if I grab this guy 20 spots earlier, that's good for me. Or because my punt build, he gives me this extra round of value. That doesn't work that way. And there's very rarely, again, a player that you have to get. Like, you don't have to get Zion if you're punting free throws. You don't have to. You don't have to be bad at free throws if you are punting free throws. And that sounds stupid. It's because of the terminology. You can be a punt free throw team and have a team that averages 78% from the line, because we are concentrating our resources into the other categories. And if we win free throws, it's a bonus. And if we lose them, it doesn't matter. It's not about being bad. You do not have to, if I'm punting this category, I've got to grab this guy. It's not how it works. He might help you, but that's just not how it works. And that brings us to talking about free throws. Eric says, if you've got Kyrie and Jordan Poole, does that balance the negatives of Zion's free throws? I'm going to have a look at some numbers while we talk about that. But off the top of my head, I would say probably yes. I'm just going to check it out. But you can build a team to bring a team with Giannis. You can bring that team to 80% free throws. Even if he shoots 68% on 11 attempts, you can do it. It's not the greatest way to allocate your resources, but you can do it. So I'm pretty confident with Zion, we can balance that out pretty quickly. What's your thoughts on that, Dan? It's not always the best way to do it, but it's not impossible.
I think that's actually a pretty good pairing. I was trying to look up the per game numbers, but I think we could safely pencil in Poole for 6 to 7 free throws a game. I'd say Kyrie is probably relatively close to that. Zion's not going to be shooting 14. So I think by sheer numbers, those guys should be able to overcompensate for Zion's mistakes. And Zion isn't awful. Like, there's definitely games where he'll go 6 for 10.
But I think he could also 7 of 9 in other games. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So, like, I actually think that that's actually a really good combination if you're getting Zion.
I looked it up. It puts you above average. It puts you probably at like 80%. Average is about 79.2 or something like that.
I was thinking 78.
Yeah. So look, often when you've got those high free throw guys in the first rounds, your team sits at like 85%. So getting to 80 is not fantastic. But then what you do is when the other players start going, well, now I've got to grab Mark Williams, or I grab who's 70% shooter. Everyone's 85 comes to 84 to 83 to 82. And if you just keep yourself getting 80s and 81s, you can actually keep yourself competitive there. You start out with a deficiency, but then if you are paying more attention to it, you can help yourself keep it in that area. So it's not impossible to do. David says, is Paul George not a top 20 player anymore? I saw him fall to 30 in ADP. And Dan, I will put it this way. There is a large, and I don't know why, but there is a large hatred of Paul George out there, and I don't really know why. Man, the guy's never hurt. He just sits every back-to-back. He's always... Yeah, look, he's had some injury problems, but the non-back-to-back things is garbage. He played them. He is... I saw him fall to 40 in one draft. I don't understand why there is just so much fantasy negativity against Paul George.
I just got him at 44 in a industry mock, and I'm like, keep letting him fall because I'll take him. The one reason I really like him is because he has 3 positional eligibility in Yahoo. There's only 6 players that have that. That's crucial, especially in load management era when you need to plug guys into various spots. But I think this Clippers team is gonna rest less than they have in the past. There's been a considerable focus on the league level to get them to not miss these nationally televised games. But I think there's also a window of time that's closing for this Clippers team to actually be good and compete for a title. They all know that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see, Paul George, assuming he can stay healthy, a healthy Paul George can play over 60 games. That's all I need from a 4th round value, considering he's a top 20 player, not only in the league, but he's proven that to be that in fantasy too. So I don't get it. I think that's one of the better values that's been falling in drafts.
Agree. And the other thing is that narrative is so powerful, right? Go check out any appearance that Law Murray does on a podcast or read his tweets if you don't want to believe me. But people just think the Clippers are just resting everybody. They're not. Like, they don't. Kawhi was playing back-to-backs. He tore his ACL. He came back from a torn ACL, like Klay Thompson, like Jamal Murray, and he sat back-to-backs. And then he played a back-to-back. And then he tore his meniscus. Paul George sat like 2 back-to-backs because he tore his hamstring. And then he played them before that, and then he came back and he played them again, and then he hurt his knee. They are not just sitting guys willy-nilly the way that the media makes it out that they are. It just is not true. And I don't know why that reputation... The team that was actually more egregious in resting players last season, Dan, was in California, and it was the Warriors. They would routinely just be like...
Thompson.
Steph, Draymond, everyone, you're just out. Everyone's just out all at once in this one game. That was way worse in terms of healthy resting than the Clippers. The Clippers did not do that. They sat guys on injury recovery management plans, which I would say there's hardly anyone out here who's going to be like, hey, yeah, you come back from an ACL. Can you just play 40 minutes a night back-to-back? Like, that's stupid. That never happens to any player. But this narrative is pushed out that the Clippers do that. They don't. And if they're healthy, they're going to play. They're going to play. And that's the thing that is frustrating about that narrative. Again, Law Murray, Clippers beat reporter. Just go check his tweets. Anything he does, he will show you the details on it if you don't want to believe me. It's one of those things also that, we can talk fantasy and projections and players, Dan, but how you consume media in fantasy is really important because you might just get told something or see it somewhere and you go, oh, that's true. But it's not. And that can influence your decisions. And understanding how we get there, like the other day, there was a report from one of the fantasy sites saying that Zion wasn't healthy for preseason. I go, bro, that's not true. Go and read it. And it obviously wasn't true, right? So be really cautious about the way that you consume media or what you just take at face value, even taking it at face value from me or from Dan. Check it out. We'll look into it. Don Vito says... is the last question for you, Dan, before I let you go. Are you concerned about Anfernee Simons' lack of stats outside of scoring and threes?
Not really. I think he's actually going to be the top option in Portland now. His numbers without Damian Lillard on the court last year were, 20 points, 5 assists. I think that that's certainly attainable. Sure, Scoot Henderson's going to have the ball in his hands more, but I think this kid is going to be a volume scorer, and he's proven that he can shoulder that load when given the opportunity to. So I'm actually very excited about Anfernee Simons this year. Where he's going in drafts, I think it's still a little bit late considering his role on this team now that Damian Lillard is out of the way. I think that argument could be made when Damian was there, but I think that now he's gotten the keys just as much as Scoot Henderson has to really be the focal point of the offense. So it's going to be his best statistical season. He might struggle from the field a little bit, but I think it's going to be a great source of points and threes and cheap assists in the mid to late rounds if you missed out on a guard.
Yeah, look, he's a terrible rebounder. He's not going to have good field goals, but points and threes, he's not Buddy Hield, right? Buddy Hield is points and threes. Klay Thompson is points and threes. Simons will get you better assists. He's not going to have the assists that he had in the past, but he'll get good assists, and he's also a very, very good free throw shooter, and he should get to the line a lot more this season. So while he's not going to be a steals guy, he's not going to be a rebounds guy, he is more than just a points and threes player. Dan, that's it for you and me. So thank you for coming on and chatting. All your stuff, obviously, at Yahoo and over on the Roto World Fantasy Basketball podcast. Thank you for coming on with me.
Thanks, Josh. Good seeing you, man.
All right, let's get ready for the next. We are 3 of 3, batting 3 of 3 on these guests. So I hope that the next guy is here and ready to go. Let's bring it up behind the scenes. And then after this one, I don't think I've got a guest coming on for a bit. So you'll just have me sitting there ready to go. Is he here? He is here. We are getting ready to bring him in. It is the big fella. We're going back-to-back Dans. It's Dan Besbris. Welcome.
You were wise to stack Dans. We are a dominant force.
Well, if the schedule plays out as I hope it does later on, we've actually got back-to-back Adams as well. So we'll see how that one goes. So
Dan, we're gonna have to hold our own. Dan and I got it.
No, yep. Looking forward to hearing what the conglomerate of Dans has to say here. Besbris, let's see what we've got going here, Daniel. Okay, what does that one mean? I'm trying to read that. Liliana, could you discuss the impact of an outcome versus the likelihood of it, and what type of risk you prefer to take? That's a very deep question, but what I think we're talking about here, if I am correct on this, Liliana, is the impact of an outcome versus the likelihood of it. So we might say, let's throw a name out there, Paul Reed, who's been mentioned on this show already today. The likelihood of Paul Reed hitting and playing 26 minutes a night, Dan, is probably pretty low. It's probably 5%, let's say, of him taking over from PJ Tucker, getting every available power forward and center backup minute and getting 26 minutes. But if he does, we're talking top 60 type player. Whereas somebody like, I won't use my usuals. Let's use DeAndre Hunter. When he gets 30 minutes, we don't even care. He's not remotely near that. So the likelihood of DeAndre Hunter playing 30 minutes is really, really high. The likelihood of Paul Reed doing it is very low. But the impact of that is significantly different. And when I'm in draft mode, we all know, Dan, that at a very, very minimum, we are going to turn over 3 spots out of our team after a draft. At a very minimum, probably 5 to 6 guys will end up cycling off our team. So if we're in round 11 or round 12, go the outcome. Don't go the likelihood. Go the outcome.
Yeah. If that is indeed the question, then I'm 100% on board. It does do almost no good. In fact, I think you and I talked about how completely useless Harrison Barnes is, because he's like the poster child of the high likelihood, low impact outcome player.
Absolutely.
If this question is about earlier stuff, like will Kawhi Leonard play 62 out of 82 games, then you've got sort of a different calculus you're working on there, because the impact is good. The likelihood is in between somewhere, but it's hard though. A little bit. I mean, I feel like to some degree we're always pulling things out of the sky. Like we feel like the likelihood of something is 20%, but it's hard for us to really know for sure. You kind of have to just say high, medium, or low likelihood, and then impact, same thing, high, medium, or low, and grade it out that way.
Oompa Loompa says, finally a Roto guy, which is an interesting way to go through this, Oompa Loompa, because I have started a Roto league with a bunch of analysts, and I have a couple of positions available. and I'm thinking I might give them away to some people who are on this live stream. But I'm not really sure how I'm going to do that. So stay tuned, and I'm going to have a think about it, because it's an 8-category Roto league, but I've replaced field goal percentage with effective field goal percentage. Dan, I don't even know if you've signed up to it yet or not, but it's a $50 Roto league. I think there's 8 analysts in there at the moment. So Oompa Loompa, we might be having a Roto league that I announce later on. So just be aware of that. But it's good. It is good to have.
I like the idea, by the way. It's right at the same time as my high buy-in keeper league draft. So unfortunately, I cannot join.
Well, there you go. I know Mike Catron's in there. I know Alex Raclean's in there. Obviously, I'm in there. I don't know who else in there, but there's like 8 of us in there at the moment. We'll get a few more other guys going in. Jim Bernstein, he asked this on Twitter, so I got to find it. And lucky, I just found it here for you, Jimmy. What's your strategy for game allocation in Roto League? And I'll quickly translate what I think he means here. I think what he means on this, Dan, maybe you can have a different opinion on this. That, how do you approach how you use your games cap? Do you fill it up early? Do you let it sit and then fill it up later on? Like, how do you approach that 82 game or 84 or whatever you want to do games cap for Roto? That's what I'm assuming he's asking here.
Yeah, I think that's what I would have interpreted as well. I tend to lag just slightly behind. It's pretty easy to make up ground in Roto because you can pick up and drop guys willy-nilly. There's no weekly limit on that. I also like lagging slightly behind because you can also figure out what categories to attack late in the season that other teams have sort of already used up their games played. The one thing you want to be very careful of is falling too far behind, because the cardinal sin of a games cap Roto league is not using up your games cap. I've seen it happen way too many times. Just be on top of it. Yahoo's PC version of their window has a really nice tracker down in the corner to kind of see how far along you are at each slot that I don't think shows up that clearly on mobile. So check your team every once in a while on a PC monitor would be, I guess, my other piece of advice on this one. And use probably your top 9 or 10 guys early in the year, the guys that are giving you big production per game played, as opposed to blowing Harrison Barnes games early in the season.
Yeah, that's the way that I like to look at it as well. Is I will often, and to a degree, I sort of do this in head-to-head as well. I'm willing to take losses in week 1 or week 2 to let some things settle, rather than making a bunch of reactionary moves and chasing Look, you do have to get those guys off the wire, but I don't want to be just like dropping someone because they really struggled early on. Because there's some wild shit that happened. Shout out to Bruno Fernando in the first couple of weeks of the season, right? Stuff happens very weirdly. So in Roto, I'll do the same. I will barely touch my lineup. I'll have my top 10 guys in there. I might make like one change. If someone is hurt for a long period of time, I'll take them out and replace them. And then I tend to go harder towards the middle to end of the season. And if I fill my games up with 2 days to go, I'm okay with that, because that last week, we know it gets progressively weirder as the season goes on, Dan, but even those last, say, 4 or 5 days, you might say that there's a great option off the waiver wire, but you might be in a situation where, man, I'm going to grab Justin Manea, and then he gets shut down, so Jonathan Williams can go off, because even the random bloke that you've never heard of who popped off last game gets shut down Skylar May style for the next game, so you don't even know that that's going to work out. It gets more and more unpredictable the further you go in. So I'd like to try and max it out before I'm into those last 3 to 4 days of the season.
Yeah, without question. And then if you're in a Yahoo public prize league, that's a fab situation for Roto. So you might not even get the guys you're trying to grab. You have to pick. I mean, at least what I've done is you set up like contingency for contingency for contingency, and you got about 9 moves that are all happening overnight, and like 2 of them might stick. Those guys might not even play, and you still end up 4 games down at the end of the year. So just be a little careful in that regard. But luckily, there's a lot of time. That's the beauty of Roto. You get to do it over such a nice long stretch that you can make these adjustments. People feel like they're eliminated after 2 months, but that's the farthest thing from the truth.
No, you could. I was like thinking about this Roto league I was in last season, where I went sort of slow early on, and I was last for the first 2 months, and I said, all right, it's time to get these games up. Ended up finishing second by like 1 point, because I started like putting the right guys in, and then had sort of how my players were going. I had a few guys stashed that were injured. And then we let it ride, and then we bump back up. It isn't that hard to come back from it. Cam Hunt says, Cam, you've asked me this question, I think, in a few places, and my answer to you, I haven't answered you specifically because it was it's not complex, but this is what I want to say. What FanTracks players are good values in points drafts? Now, what I would think that you're doing is looking at the way that FanTracks is ranking guys and all that sort of stuff, and As a general rule, Cam, when people are on FanTracks, they are drafting majority category leagues. So ADP data is going to be heavily skewed towards category leagues. But also the majority of people that do play on FanTracks usually tend to be more invested in fantasy basketball. And they're usually not going to go based on a predetermined list that is provided to them over on FanTracks. So you will see guys, and there'll be that list there, and guys will be going 20, 30, 40 spots down and grabbing players versus the more casual Yahoos and ESPNs where often people will just default who the first 3 names I see on the list, let me pick someone out of that group. So I don't tend to go into, well, who are the big differences in FanTracks, ADPs, and ranks, because I understand that majority of people playing on FanTracks don't actually pay any attention to that, Dan.
Yeah, this is a tough one because it is so site depend. I mean, you're always going to get some people in draft that are pulled towards the things that they can see on their board. So I mean, certainly with Yahoo, you get a lot of that, less of that on FanTracks. So I don't know that I have a great answer to this question. I'm doing a lot of hand waving to say, points drafts. If you're in a league where mostly category players are ranked, you're looking for guys that get a bump based on removing the efficiency categories, because that's usually how you make that translation between category and points leagues, with variations. Obviously, ESPN, I think their settings now do penalize you for missed shots a little bit.
They do, yep.
So just take that into account. But mostly, you're hunting more volume guys, and those guys sometimes get bumped down if they're rough in one of the 2 percentages or really rough in turnovers on a list like that. And that's, again, just sort of this broad, not that helpful answer to a good question.
There's Oompa Loompa is you're a very like, I don't know what the right word is, not traditional, but like you are like, I'm playing Roto and we've got to have turnovers. So you ask the question, why do some people prefer 8-cat? Turnovers are a huge part of the game of basketball. And I would say, are they? Like, sort of, we think they are, but like, they're not really that important. Like, yeah, the Rockets had the most turnovers per possession last season and the Warriors were second. So the turnovers are built differently as well. And we look at them and they are a category in fantasy, but a turnover that results in the ball going out of bounds or a turnover that is an offensive foul is exactly the same in terms of the way it affects your team as a missed shot, right? It doesn't enable the other team to do anything. Sometimes it can be actually more beneficial than some other things that happen. A live ball turnover creates fast break opportunities. That's more detrimental to your team. So we often look at turnover numbers and think, oh man, it's so bad to have so many turnovers. A lot of the time it's exactly the same as a missed shot. And it's not that all the best teams, like the lowest turnover team last season, Dan, the Raptors. The second lowest, the Mavericks. The third lowest, the Hawks. The fourth, the Thunder. Like, some of those are not very good. 2 of them missed the playoffs. The Hawks are very mid. The Thunder were okay. Well, three of those bottom 4 missed, or lowest turnovers missed the playoffs. The worst team in the NBA, second worst team, the Rockets, had the most. And then the Warriors got into the second round. I don't think that it's as big of a factor in terms of determining what's good or who's a good player or a good team than that versus what people think it is. But you might have a differing opinion on that.
Yeah, so I agree on a lot of that stuff. Like a Russell Westbrook turnover last year was obviously much worse than a ball rolling out of bounds or something like that. Because I could not count on the number of fingers and toes in my home how many times I saw Russ just lob it to the other team and start a fast break the other way. To that end, I do think that a player like that should be penalized in some way in fantasy or in reality. And on the flip side, someone like a Chris Paul, who traditionally has a pretty high assist to turnover ratio, and maybe that's the key, is using assist to turnover instead, should get a little bit of a benefit for being a high assist guy without turning the ball over a ton of times. So I think there's probably a middle ground on this. I like 9-cat. I think most of the really high turnover guys are going early in drafts, and so that kind of creates a wash a little bit. You're not like hunting a low turnover guy in the first or second round. If you happen to get one who's a little bit lower, great, but that's not really a big thing. I just like the idea of having guys in the middle and later rounds where if they are a lower turnover, slightly more efficient player for their team, that is a small benefit in fantasy. And flip side, you take a little bit of a hit if you're a guy who's just kicking it all over the court.
My issue in terms of turnovers and ranking players has always been that the two biggest individual stat correlations involve turnovers, and it's points to turnovers and it's assists to turnovers, meaning that if you're, as a general rule, if you have high turnovers, you'll have high points and high assists. So if you really focus on lowering turnovers, it tends to lower those two other categories. There's no other single category that has such a negative impact on two other categories the way that turnovers do. The other thing is if you're in a head-to-head format versus Roto as well, you're on a weekly basis. So if you're in a situation where you are handicapped by injuries or games played, your turnovers will naturally be lower anyway. So if you're really focusing on having lower turnovers when you're at that situation when your other categories are going to be dropped, you're going to be stronger in that area anyway. Whereas I'd rather just try and use streaming to bulk up my other numbers versus trying to keep this one down when it then negatively influences two other categories. That's the part of the reason why I'm like, if you overly focus on it, it can lead to detriments in other areas if you aren't really specific about the players that you select.
Yeah, I don't think I can argue with that because, again, in head-to-head, you're often trying to win the games played battle. Although, didn't you say you were starting a 40 weekly limit or something like that? Yeah, I love that idea.
Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, we're using Roto type games cap limits. So for each position, you can only use 4 games for each position for the week. 10 starters, 4 games each, maximum 40. We will see how it goes, but it is definitely a different strategy where streaming is not that important.
I love it. I think that, I mean, well, I like anything that makes a game feel a little bit more like Roto.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm a little bit of a scumbag in that regard. But no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I think some of it also is when people say, oh, I'm punting turnovers. It's this discussion you and I have had before where punting doesn't mean that you are aggressively trying to lose the category. You're just not focusing on it that hard. So maybe you still win it 30, 40% of the time, just naturally by not paying attention to it, also not trying to lose it. So there is that very thick line between those two ideas.
Yeah, like people will see when I do mock drafts, if I'm like in a situation where I'm punting assists, I'm the best team in turnovers, and I don't include it in my ranking assessment whatsoever. It just naturally happens. That's why I always talk about when viewing rankings, don't look at it and have Delon Wright as your 49th best player and Giannis as your 100th best player, because it just leads you down a path of absolute shit. Like it just won't, it has no basis in reality in terms of how those things work out. Whereas if you do have low assists, you will have low turnovers. That is just how those categories work. Dan, have you got time for one more question?
Absolutely. Ring them up.
All right, Yellow Mamba. I've seen you ask this a couple of times, so we'll get to it now. At what point do you take a player that has fallen a certain amount of spots and now provides great value, even though they do not fit your team's needs?
So there isn't an exact number of spots I need to see a player fall, but I am typically valuing the player that I think is in a really good position over my team's needs. I don't, and some of this is because of my Roto bent, where I focus more on trying to be good in 7 or 8 categories instead of very, very good in 5. But if I see a player that I think is going to be an extraordinary value, I'm going to take them and I'm going to worry about my team needs later, whether that's later in the draft or later in the damn year, because you can trade these dudes. And trading down, I put this in air quotes, in value is very easy to do because other teams will jump at the idea of getting the higher ranked player, even if you can target the perfect player for your team. And by the way, by January, you know what that player is going to do. Whereas on draft night, there is a bit of uncertainty about all of these guys. So take the player falling X spots most of the time in this scenario, and I feel pretty strongly about that too.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. This is what I said earlier on. I can't remember which guest we were talking about when someone was talking about who is the perfect pairing guy or who is the guy that you want for building. I said, just don't worry about it. Like if you've got to ask that question, that means you are more likely to get yourself tied up in a knots by reaching someone for a very specific narrow focus. The way that you can win and have this success, you can win in multiple ways, but if you want to have success in a draft and put yourself in the best position, some of it through luck, it's by getting a guy that you get at 80 who becomes the 20th best player, Larry Markkinen, right? That's it. Look, that's a leg up that you cannot get anywhere else. You can't do that in any other way. So even if Nick Claxton, who was ADP, honestly, like 120 last season, if you are in a punt block situation, like at that phase, you go, I've just got to do it, man. Like even if it changes my team, like he then becomes a top 40 player. You trade him off.
Yeah, you're not punting blocks anymore.
Yeah, or
congratulations.
Mm-hmm.
You change your team build and you go, hey, listen, maybe I'll just add Walker Kessler off the wire, or I'll go and add Mark Williams for a little bit. And guess what? Now you're good at blocks. getting that extra value. It's about what did I invest in these players? Like if I invest a round 1, 2, 3, all the way through these picks, but I end up with, instead of a round 1 player, a round 2, round 3, I end up with 5 round 4 players because all these guys popped off. Well, that's much better than like I've got a real focus on this narrow build. You will tie yourself in a knot doing that, and the risk of you making mistakes in doing that is so much higher than just like, this guy just, it seems like it's way too low. What am I doing? Just grab him and then we'll figure it out later.
Yeah, and people think that we're pulling this out of the sky, but it was, I think, 3 years ago. I still remember it. I had a team where I thought I was punting rebounds. Someone had to drop Jonas Valanciunas because he was out for 8 weeks and their team was floundering and they only had like 3 IL spots and needed another one. I picked him up and I wasn't punting rebounds anymore. And I won that league because I won rebounds in the finals. So this stuff happens all the time. You pick up guys that you didn't think you wanted. If you're so focused on this build thing, you're going to miss out on a bunch of guys all season long. It's just like, that guy doesn't fit my build. But these guys are the ones that change teams. You want those highly ranked dudes. Deal with this stuff later. That's the best advice we can give here.
Dan, we do this stuff 365 days of the year, right? And I've been doing it for a long time. And in the past, I would focus a lot more on builds, but I sit and I look and I see this stuff all the time. And this offseason in particular, I've really just been like focusing on the fact of the way that you are having this success is not by perfectly constructing a draft team. It just isn't. It's by being nimble. It's by making the right moves at the right time. And it's just by hitting the value. So I've turned more into this guy is like, once I hit like round 10, round 11, I don't want Harrison Barnes. Like I need the guy who might every year. I want to get, if my round 11, 12, 13, 14 players all end up as top 75 players, awesome, right? That means I'm going to be impossible to beat, basically. But if I end up as the 170th best player, it doesn't matter. It honestly doesn't matter. These are all absolutely expendable options. And when we focus now, look, you can get away with building the perfect team with this perfect build that makes you undefeated. That's more like if your opponents have no idea what they're doing as well. And they're like, that is that. But otherwise, yeah, I've really started to focus more on this ethos of just, we want to grab the better players, find the value, let other stuff, it will change. Let it all come to us versus like, stop narrowly tying yourself into a group of 10 or 15 players. And people will often say, well, part of the reason against punting is that you're only limited with who you can pick up. And that's garbage. You just pick up guys you think are going to be good and you just fix it and you adjust it and you change what you need to do to make yourself successful.
Yeah, you're preaching to the old man choir over here.
Awesome. And that would bring the preaching session to an end with us, Dan. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for staying those extra couple of minutes and answering a couple more questions. And people will catch you over on the old Twitters and over on your show as well.
That's what they will do. Thank you, Josh. It's my pleasure. I hope the Dans held our end of the bargain here.
The two Dans really kick things off on this show really well. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Josh.
All right, so now it is just me for a little bit until we get our next guest on. But that's cool because we have got questions that I'm going to ask, or not ask, I'm going to answer them from you guys. And Sherwin has a question here. And it always amazes me, but maybe I feel like I'm just, I don't know what the right thing to say here is, but I get it all the time and it's worth me saying it right now. Sherwin says, Josh, what do you recommend to use to track your draft as you go to see where you stand in categories? Sherwin, basketballmonster.com. This is what I use. This is what I tell you that I do at the start of every single show. And welcome to new people. Or some people just hear me say because it's just part of what I do. But I also should explain what Basketball Monster is. I do daily projections of fantasy basketball players, season-long projections of fantasy basketball players. We have draft trackers, team analysis, trade analysis, robust player discussions. Hey, if you're disappointed the Roto World forums are gone, we have player discussions over in Basketball Monster, the same sort of thing. We have all these tools that are over there, and Draft Tracker is one of the best things that I use every day when I'm doing drafts. That is how I track my stats. So when I say that I work for basketballmonster.com and the show is brought to you by Basketball Monster, that is what Basketball Monster is. So Sherwin, thank you for teeing me up with a promo, but that's what it is. Simple, I think. Carlo, I agree about that. Giat, Kai, Senat, Rizlor, Sigma, Giga, Chad, No Cap, LeBron James. Yeah, no, 100%. I'm in on that. They also called me the Rizzler, so what are you going to do? All right, let's go. Is RJ Barrett, Don Vito says, a waste of a last round pick? I needed some scoring. I saw 19 points per game in the last round. Is he a waste of a last round pick? Hard to say anyone is a waste in the last round, honestly. Barrett has significant downsides. No steals, no blocks, bad field goals, bad free throws on high volume. Not a great rebounder, not a great assist guy, low volume threes. He can score. My worry this season is with a full season of Josh Hart, with third-year Quentin Grimes, with fourth-year Emmanuel Quickley, with the addition of Dante DiVincenzo, and we saw this at the end of last season that Tom Thibodeau went in there and said, RJ, maybe instead of 36 a night, you're playing 30, and he would get benched for fourth quarters. Now, he's had some better moments through the World Cup. There's no waste in taking him there, but I'm a little worried he doesn't have quite the level of not the right thing to say is he doesn't have quite the length of patience that he may have had in the past. Okay. Johan Matthews, what are the averages of each stat in order to know if players are negatively or positively affecting your team in general? Well, Johan, that's going to depend on your league, honestly. But if we're going to talk a standard 12-team league, it's around 18 and a half, 19 points. It's around 1.9 threes. 6 rebounds, 3.7 assists, 1.1 steals, 0.7 blocks, 49 and 80 is the percentages are the usual. And think about 2 turnovers. They're average. But it does depend on your league. Because the deeper your league, the averages drop more. Abraham says, do you think there is merit to capping the number of players a manager can retain in a keeper league? I'm concerned about lack of year-to-year roster turnover despite a built-in inflation system in place. I don't know. I am very much more going to be looked towards dynasty than keeper leagues. I don't really like the idea of a keeper league. Because we've got a 2-keeper league. That's just a redraft league, really. Like, I don't really get it. Like, part of the appeal of having a keeper or dynasty league is to more accurately resemble the job of an NBA GM, well, you should be able to keep more players. The lack of roster turnover doesn't bother me that much. That's why you have rookie drafts coming in, and theoretically, that should boost the amount of trading that happens. But if you absolutely, we need roster turnover. Why are you playing in a keeper league if roster turnover is your big thing? But if you want more roster turnover, then sure, like put a cap on it. But nearly always, if I'm going to do a league that goes on multiple years, I don't want a keeper league. I want a dynasty league where I can just keep anybody for whatever price that I want. Like, I just keep them. And then I make adjustments versus trades and cuts and rookie drafts versus I can only keep 3 or 4. That's a personal preference. Took Nas Reed with my last round pick. Do I think there's a chance he's the 6th man this year? No. I don't even know if he's the 6th man on this team. He was really good last game. But what we also have to remember, right, is that Reed is there, Gobert is there, and Towns is there. Let's say Gobert plays bare minimum 30 minutes. So that's 18 minutes of backup for Nas Reed, meaning Towns plays 0 minutes at center, which doesn't seem particularly likely. Will they get all of the power forward minutes between those 3 guys? Theoretically they could, but that would mean that Jaden McDaniels and Kyle Anderson play 0 minutes at power forward. And if Jaden McDaniels is playing 31 minutes at small forward, that means Kyle Anderson's playing 17 minutes, which again seems very unlikely. I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker is going to be more of their 6th man versus what Nas Reed does. Now, if one of Towns or Gobert goes down, can Reed and Gobert even play together? I don't know. Maybe. He hit some threes last game, but it's very hard to be a 6th man candidate as a big man unless your starter is a 20-minute-a-night player. Montrezl Harrell did it as a 6th man backup center because the starter was playing 21 minutes a night and he played 27. But Towns and Gobert aren't playing 21 minutes a night. So just on that basis alone, how does he play enough? Look, maybe they try something different, and those guys, the 96 minutes at power forward and center is all Towns, Reed, and Gobert. And there's 33, 33, and 30 minutes. Seems unlikely. Or maybe Reed even plays 20, but is 20 minutes of Nas Reed enough to be useful? I have significant doubts about that because, again, it would mean that someone like McDaniels and Kyle Anderson get cut down pretty significantly as well. Riley James says, do I think it matters for fantasy if Chris Paul starts or plays off the bench? Would minutes or production be similar? I think it does matter a little bit. Usually, coming off the bench versus starting gives you about a 2 to 3 minutes difference, usually. Very unlikely for a guy off the bench to be a 31-minute-a-night player. I'm not saying that if Chris Paul starts, he would play 31 minutes a night, but he played 32 minutes a night last season. There are some people who have some wild minutes projections for Chris Paul this season. Talking to a guy yesterday on Twitter thinks that Jonathan Kuminga is going to play more than Chris Paul and Paul's going to play 24 a night, which I just don't think is going to happen. That is such a big, big departure from where Paul was last season. Even last year, like Jordan Poole played 30 minutes a night coming off the bench. That was with injuries to Curry and injuries to Klay Thompson or resting from Klay Thompson early in the season. If Chris Paul starts, I'd imagine 30 to 31. If he comes off the bench, I'd imagine 28 to 29. 2 minutes might not seem like much, but it is an impact. It's just very hard to be a consistent 31, 32 minute a night player off the bench. Harlem's just setting me up here. Sleeper app, the new lock-in mode. What are my thoughts? Trash. Sleeper is bad for fantasy basketball. It looks pretty, but it's bad. Let me tell you why. It could easily be one of the best, if not the best format out there, but they are stubborn and they refuse to do the things that they need to do. It is the easiest change. Allow us to play category leagues. Right? Simple. Give us an option that isn't lock-in. They think they have reinvented fantasy basketball and they are like, you must play our way or nothing else. Well, nothing else then. Basketball is not the NFL. We don't play one game a week. They claim that choosing this one game is an added layer of strategy. It's not. It's an added layer of luck. You cannot, I have studied this shit for so long. You cannot, with any level of precision, predict which game, based on opponent, that a player is going to do more in. You can't do that. It is an element of luck, which doesn't determine the best player. Basketball is not football. Have your little mode, have your lock-in mode, have your game pick mode, whatever. But if you want people to actually come and play on your platform, the vast majority of people play category leagues and we play with daily changes. So I'm not going to come and play it. Make your changes. Simple. Who do I think grabs the respective starting spot for their respective teams? Jarris Walker or Keontae George? I think both of them do. I guess you're asking who do I think does it first? That is a good question. I think it's probably George. Walker's an interesting player who's going to have some big fantasy nights, but also going to struggle a lot of the time with low usage and very bad percentages. Whereas George, if he does start, is going to be having the ball in his hands, scoring and getting quite good assists. Oh, there you go. Who are the 5 guys leading the league in blocks this year? That is a good question, and I can actually go and I know that much. Although, despite the people telling me that he wins blocks alone, he was nowhere near the best shot blocker in preseason. I've got Kessler, Wembanyama, Miles Turner, Jaren Jackson, and Nick Claxton as my top 5 shot blockers for the season, with Chet Holmgren marginally behind Claxton. But Wemby, Turner, Jackson, Claxton, Holmgren are all within 0.15 blocks of each other in my projection, so all basically the same. All right, let's go to the next question. I hope you guys are enjoying this. Hey, give it a thumbs up if you are here and subscribe to the channel. Where's Obi? Victor says he's outside the door barking at something. I don't know what he's doing. Let's have a look. No AD. I've got AD at like 2.1 blocks, Travion, so just below those guys who I've got Chet at like 2.4, but it's very conceivable. 0.2 blocks is nothing, right? He could easily jump ahead there, but I've got him down at like, he's at 7 in my list there, Davis. But I do have, in terms of projected shot blockers, I've got like 15 guys at 1.5 blocks per game for this season. Lucas, I talked about that earlier, player value versus upside. The further you get into a draft, the more you want upside value, I think. Do I think there is a chance that ESPN changed the suspended IR eligibility rule, or are they stubborn about things like this? The thing that is interesting about this N23 is that, yeah, they are stubborn, but they changed this like 2 days ago. Someone called it out and said, hey, why are these guys IR eligible? They shouldn't be. And they went, oh, yeah, you're right, we'll change it. So they made a deliberate decision to change it so that Jar and Miles Bridges are not eligible for IR, which I cannot disagree with more. I think it's a ridiculous decision, but they're not going to change it back. They deliberately made that change a week ago, or whatever it was. Get your beard back. Yeah, no worries. I'll just put it back on. Done. What would you change in a draft of a Yahoo Points League that only counts the highest score of the week of each player? So that's the sleeper system. I just wouldn't play it, honestly. I just don't understand what the point of that system is. what that does is it does help when players are more likely to be sitting back-to-backs. It gives them a little bit more value because you don't have to get their bulk totals for the week. But yeah, I just wouldn't play in a league like that. Mario, I've asked lots of questions. There's been lots of Harden stuff already. I'm not going to get into it. Someone said my camera is lagging, so I'm apologizing for that. I think I know what it is, but I can't actually get out of this and stop it. Maybe I think even if I pause this, it won't work, and then it will end the stream, and I don't want to do that. So I do apologize that it is lagging. It's just a setting that I had incorrect, which I am apologizing for, obviously. Do I think there's any chance that Toumani Camara hits 12-team value this season? Only if Jeremy Grant is out, and even then, it's very unlikely for a rookie picked in the 50s who's a reserve to be a 12-team league player. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, but it's hard to get there. Aaron says, how do you know in an auction draft if you've got a good value? Well, you've got to have a projected value system, don't you? The only way you can know that is if you have an understanding of how you value the players. Now, obviously, we do this over on Basketball Monster, but I can't really just tell you, well, you've just got to, value this player this way. You have to understand how you value the players, how you want to set up your valuation. Do you want to trust what we do with projections and how that dollar value sits? That's up to you. The only way I know how I value players because I have the system at Basketball Monster where we go in there and we look at the value of the players and convert that to a dollar amount. So when someone goes for 10 and I've got them valued at 18, yeah, I'm really happy with getting them at that value. But it's all about that overall standard score type value number, incorporated into your overall league budget, which does change as things go on. How much do you adjust how to pay for players in a 10-team auction draft? Well, there's less money around in a 10-team auction draft for a start. In a 12-team versus 10-team, that's two teams with $200 budgets that aren't there. So $400 less dollars to spread around. $400 less dollars on 26 fewer players. Work out how that works. Also, in a 10-team league, the back end of your roster is a lot stronger than it is in a 12-team league. So, and the waiver wire is as well. So you don't necessarily want to be in a situation where you are spending up for your 12th or 13th guy in a 10-team league because there might be 50 guys sitting on the waiver wire that are as equivalent to them. So the shallower you go in an auction league, 8, 10 teams, the more you can spend up to play stars and scrubs. The deeper you go, the more value you get in a balanced type of build. But in terms of how you value them, you've got to figure out a system of the pricing that you do based on the valuation of that player. Again, we have that on Basketball Monster, but there's no set, well, this guy averages this points, that equals that many dollars. Would it be fair to say that Keegan Murray can finish the season as the Kings version of Michael Porter Jr.? Yeah, but he's nowhere near the player that Michael is. Like, Michael Porter Jr. was an elite prospect. As an elite shooter, Keegan is not that player in the slightest to me. And am I a Keegan Murray hater? Maybe you could say that. But also, everything we've seen in the preseason, to me, looks exactly like the Keegan Murray we saw last season. That's not to say that's what he's going to do last season and or going to do this season. He could improve a lot. But as I have constantly said throughout this preseason process, he needs to go from being the 6th usage option up to, at best, the 3rd, and then start to bring some other numbers. And that's a big ask. And he hasn't shown any of that, I don't think, so far in the preseason. Townie BE says, I've been watching your mock draft series. I'm always seeing Halliburton in top 5 above Luka. Is he going to be that good? I'm sometimes seeing Giannis at 8 or 9. Isn't that a bit low? How do I answer this? Halliburton in top 5 above Luka. Luka has the deficiency of free throw, but also a 2-game playoff week. That is why I would put Halliburton above Luka. And Giannis at 8 or 9, isn't that a bit low? Well, he's got a problem with his knees. It's going to cause him to miss a lot of time. Some people get very scared about free throw percentage. Giannis also saw his defensive stats drop quite a bit last season. If they come back, now there's two ways that Giannis's defensive stats might have dropped last season. A, it was the knee and he was preserving himself. Or B, it was the fact that his usage was so sky high that he couldn't put in the effort defensively that he needed to. In yesterday's preseason game, he played 18 minutes and had 2 blocks. And I went, all right, that's very interesting. If he goes back to being a 1.7 block, 1.2 steals guy, then yes, he is a top 3 player. But I don't know whether it was knee or usage related that got in there. So that's why people are pushing back a little bit on Giannis, in my opinion. Is Cameron Payne or Saban Lee a better stash for Locked On Fantasy Basketball? Well, it is Payne very clearly. Lee is a two-way player who's not even the backup point guard on his own team. Cameron Payne is. So Cameron Payne's the better stash. If I have an IL slot, IL plus along with IL, do I draft Jar and or Miles? I don't think that Miles is going to play. Do you draft Jar? You can draft Jar at IL plus, But it really depends on where you're getting him, because in a category league, again, he's not that good. And you don't want to take him until you get to pick 90. Tristan, I saw this before. I'll get to it now. I've been working on balancing Z scores by using specified interquartile ranges instead of standard deviation to balance skewed cuts like blocks. What are my thoughts on this? I looked at this a while ago, and I'm pretty sure I did some interquartile stuff, and I didn't love how it came out. It didn't seem to give the appropriate answer to me. So try it, see how you get with it. It didn't seem to give the correct response or the correct answers to me. Kawhi at 19, is that too high? Look, if Kawhi is healthy and plays 65 games, then it's absolutely not too high. He is healthy because he's playing in preseason. Right, he is a top 13 to top 10 player. We have the risk of a repeated injury. He will miss some back-to-backs. There's no question about any of that. He is going to do that. 19 is probably risky, but I don't hate getting him at the end of round 2, like 22, 23, 24. How do I prepare for auction drafts? Do I go in with a team build in mind or decide the build after making a few picks? I think it's a good idea to have a couple of little builds. I create a spreadsheet usually with a bunch of players that I look at based on my valuation, and then I compare it to Yahoo's projected dollars and Yahoo's average dollars. And I try and get my team on a $200 budget if by using my valuation of the players and Yahoo's projected or averages. I want, obviously, the projected and averages, whichever one's the highest, I'll tend to use. I get that to $200 on a team, but I want my valuations of them to hit $270 or $300. And I'll put a couple of different options there on a spreadsheet for it. And then if one of those, then I have a spreadsheet and I can type the little prices into that when those players go. And if a guy goes for $3 under what the projected number was, well, I know I've got an extra $3 to play around with somebody else. And then I can look at this guy and go, well, I've got $3 extra here. Maybe I can upgrade this player to another one. If you want to get really like in depth about it, you can create these big sort of decision trees. So this is my structure here. It gives me $300 of value, but if I can find an extra $4 or $5, well, this guy can then be upgraded to this player, and this guy can be upgraded to this player, or this guy can be downgraded to this player, depending on how my budget goes. So I'm always looking where I've got my $200 to spend, and usually I'll usually try and build it out at about $190, so I've got a $10 plus minus. But each time someone goes for lower price than that or higher price than that, I take $2-3 out or add $2-3 back in to know what I'm spending. And I also have all the basketball monster projections there, but that's how I do it. Guys, I don't love the thoughts questions. I don't really know how to answer those a lot of the time, so just be more specific in your questions. Lance says, is Jokic a lock for 101 in a points league? Am I overthinking it? I don't think that Nikola Jokic will be the number one player in a Yahoo points league. He was not last season. But the reliability of Jokic usually tops a guy like Doncic. Although, is Jokic going to be as reliable this season? Will he start off sluggishly? Almost definitely. Will he sit a few more games? Yeah. So if you are in a Yahoo points league, it is not insane to suggest that you take somebody else at number one. The problem is the other options are Giannis, Luka, and Embiid. Embiid, we know. Giannis, knees, and Lillard. Luka, well, he's currently got an injury problem at the moment with his calf at the moment, and they're all concerns. But Jokic wasn't number one in Yahoo points last season. So don't be afraid that if you don't want to go that route, you're not making the incorrect decision. Gil says, how do I see Dallas' center working? Lively seems way too raw to be a reliable piece of the rotation, let alone a starter. I think he's going to start opening night. Is he raw? Sure. Are the other guys shit? Yes. And I think there is part of it, and I heard someone mention this somewhere, maybe it was Tim Cato, talking about that having Lively out there and Jason Kidd putting faith in him is also a way of the organization to say to Luka, hey, Luka, look at this. Look at our future here. We traded up. We got this guy. We think he's going to be this perfect pick and roll partner for you moving forward. We are committing to getting you assets versus bringing Dwight Powell out there again and running with him. And Lively will have a very limited role, but it's also a look, hey, look what we are building here for you. Look at this guy that we can, look at the flashes he's got. Look at the way that we are trying to build this for you. So I think that as a 10th overall pick that they traded for, they didn't trade up, they traded down. My bad, sorry. Getting the 12th overall pick in Dereck Lively and not playing him at all is not a great sign for the organization towards Luka, I don't think. Is he raw? Sure. But the guys behind him, like, what are they? They're not that good. I would think that he will be almost definitely, and I wouldn't have thought this 2 months ago, but the fact that they came out, and it's very hard to make a big show of starting a rookie like that and say, by the way, you're not going to play. That just is very unlikely to do. The guy that did that last that I can remember from a top, let's say, lottery pick was David Fizdale with the Knicks, who started Kevin Knox in every preseason game and got to the game at the regular season and went, by the way, Kev, you've started all these games, but you're actually shit, so please come off the bench. And honestly, it ruined his career. I don't think Kevin Knox was going to be good, but he was, man, we love what Knox is doing. He's a great starter. He was so good. We're so excited. It's going to be awesome. First game, actually, Knox actually struggled, and we're not going to play him. That killed him. And Jason Kidd's bad, don't get me wrong. I don't think they're going to make that mistake. Maybe they do, but I don't think they are. Who provides the most value between Vando, Prince, and Rui? Well, that's a really good question, but also a terrible question because I don't know what you mean. In a points league, a category league. I'd say that Vanderbilt's currently, or not I'd say, Vanderbilt is currently injured, so he's not playing. It looks like Prince might get an opportunity to start instead of Rui. I don't think you want any of them for any 12-team leagues. And in a points league, I'd go with Rui over Prince, but these are just deeper league situations. Anthony says he's got a buddy asking, what did I have for breakfast? What did I have for breakfast? I had something, but I don't remember what it was. Oh, I had a white chocolate and date scone. There you go. That's what I had. Trey Young has jumped between being a first and second round pick and much lower value over the past few years. Where do I think Trey finishes this year and why? Well, you saw I did a mock draft the other day, 14-team league, and I took Trey Young at pick number 13. So that's really where I see Trey as that sort of a player. I understand that he's going to have bad field goals, and overall ranking is such a weird thing that has so many factors in. If you've got to understand where they come from or why they are like that before you overly rely upon those numbers to be the determining factor in what you do. So if you say that Trey is the 50th ranked player last season, you're talking out your ass to begin with, and that's just not how reliable they are. Trey was a little bit down last season, mainly because his three-point shooting numbers fell away. He is really consistently, I think, in that second round range, pushing to the start of the first because of uncertainty around some other guys in that range. That's how I would say it. And that will bring it to the end of my little solo section here, because we do have our next guest ready to go. And he is coming to us all the way from Bris Vegas. It is Mitch Casey. Welcome, Mitch.
Hey, Josh. Good morning. How are you, mate?
I am good. Someone just asked me what I had for breakfast. What did you have for breakfast today?
I had a smoothie for breakfast. Strawberries and spinach and all that good stuff.
Yeah, you're healthy though, so don't worry about that. I did white chocolate and date scone, like Baker's Delight.
Ooh,
Baker's
nice.
Yeah, the ones from Baker's Delight, like they're pretty good. They're pretty good.
Very nice.
All right, now people have been asking me this question a lot, but I'm going to get someone else's opinion on it. Jensen asks Mitch, Dereck Lively, do you think he's rosterable in 12-team leagues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you might as well have a crack. If he's terrible the first few weeks, you can drop him. But, starting centers who block shots and have good field goal percentage and work from the free throw line, have a crack. And, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But, yeah, definitely someone you should at least, draft.
He is 100% rosterable. Whether he stays there or not, we don't know. But once you're in that zone where Dereck Lively goes, there is no other center there that's blocking shots. There's nobody. After round 10, centers disappear. They're gone. You can't find them. So a guy that might block 1.7 shots in 22 minutes, I'll happily take that, Like, that's useful. And if it doesn't work out, as you said, Mitch, who cares? We just move on. We get the next guy. But 100%, he should not sit on any single waiver wire. None whatsoever. All right. Epic Brouhaha. What are the chances that Bob Covington has value to begin this season? Would I rather take him or Bilal late? Covington's an interesting one, Mitch. I still don't know what they're doing, because they're apparently going to start Batum in the preseason game tomorrow. There's Morris who was running with the starters in preseason. Terrence Mann started a game. Covington started a game. They've got 12 rotation players, so 2 of them aren't going to play. Covington's got a chance of it, and we talked about this earlier in this stream, that you want to take a chance of high-end outcome. And Covington's got way more high-end outcome than Batum, than Mann, and then Morris. But he also could play 0 minutes.
Yeah, I think of the 2 guys mentioned in this question, I'd definitely rather take Bilal Coulibaly. I just feel more confident in the team prioritizing him and featuring him in terms of minutes, offense, in terms of the defensive stats. I also I don't know. I'm not ready to buy in the Robert Covington renaissance this season. He's a guy that, he can flash a game here and there, but then go missing for another several games. And the rotation of this Clippers team just exacerbates that. There's other things of like James Harden potential deals. I don't know. I have a hard time visualizing Robert Covington being a player that has sustained value on fantasy teams this year. But that's me just probably being ageist at this stage.
Would you agree or disagree that if Covington won the starting job and was the regular 29-minute a night starter, that he would be a better fantasy option than Coulibaly as a starter this season?
Probably. Yeah, I probably would agree with that. I just have a tough time seeing that play out.
I agree. I think that Coulibaly is going to provide numbers that are similar to Covington's, but worse if they were to play equal minutes. But you're right about organizational priorities. And the competition's Avdia and Kispert, who knows how they view those guys. But Bilal might not even start. I think he will, but maybe he plays 24 minutes. But you're right in terms of the level of consistency with him probably feels a bit better than the Clippers, who, honestly, 12 guys. 2 of them aren't playing each night. And I think one's going to be KJ Martin, but the other one's going to be between Batum, Morris, and Covington. One of those guys isn't going to play each night. Do they rotate them? Do they just completely sit and disappear? Who knows? It is still a very, very difficult situation. Dimitri 3 says, any chance the Spurs start Bassi over Collins? None. 0. No chance.
I'd love them to. I'd really like them to, because I think Bassi's a great player. But no, I don't think it's going to happen.
I don't think it's going to happen either. Emma says, how productive does a player like Bilal or Keontae have to be before you drop them in a typical head-to-head 9-category league? Mitch, my usual way of looking at this is, for the first 2 weeks of a season, I'll be okay taking an L on waiting to see what happens with these guys, especially like a Keontae, where I go, the guy in front of him is Horton Tucker, and I just don't think he's very good, right? But you get to the stage where people will hold too long. And it happened with a lot of people with Tari Eason last season. Usually, I would look to hold through to... Now, we're starting October 24th this season. My absolute latest cutoff on waiting and stashing these guys is usually going to be December 1st. That's usually going to be like that's 6 weeks in. I go, look, if nothing's actually cracking here, then I can't afford to keep holding zeros or top 250 players. How do you view that?
This is like it's one of the hardest questions to answer, because it totally depends on your league.
True.
It totally depends on well, how are you going holding these zeros? Are you falling behind the standings? Are you maintaining and treading water and doing okay, and you can afford to still wait on these guys? So if your league is super competitive and you're falling behind, well, then you probably have a shorter leash on these guys than if you are still cruising along sort of top half of the standings. Then you can afford to still wait on these guys. And the other factor is, well, if you're dropping them, who are you grabbing? Like, is there someone that, puts up short-term value that you can grab and it's going to be a big win? Is there something else hot on the waiver wire that you can pivot to? So to me, it's a very difficult question to give a blanket answer to. I will usually give players, I like to be patient. I think a lot of times we are trigger happy. So I like to, usually if there's a guy that's high upside, I'll give them at least 2 weeks. But with that being said, all those other factors I talked about, who's on the waiver wire is another option. How far are you falling behind your league? Always still apply.
Yeah, it's like if you cop 3 injuries and you're still holding a 0, then you can't do it, right? Because otherwise you are going to end up. It's also different losing 4-5 than losing 1-8, right? If you're losing 4-5s for 3 weeks, totally cool, right? That's absolutely reasonable. You can probably sustain going 4-5 up until December the 1st, even if you don't get a win in there, to see what happens. But if you're getting smacked and everyone's hurt and you've got 3 of these guys that you're waiting on, then you're going to be way too far behind. The Eason one is a great example last season. People waited and we wanted to see what happened, but it became pretty obvious by the middle of November that it just wasn't going to play, and you couldn't wait on that situation. And then as soon as you get a marginal inkling that it changes, you add, and then maybe you got another 4 or 5 days of holding. But these sort of things like George or Bilal or whoever it is, or even a Lively, give it 2 weeks, I would say minimum, because the first 2 weeks of the season's rotations are insane. Like, there's so many weird things that will happen and they will sort out, but then it does become very context dependent.
Yeah, 100%.
Don Vito says, would I still take Mark Williams over Dan Gafford? I don't know that I've been necessarily as rock solid or, absolutely straight down the line with that one. Do I, Gafford's got nobody behind him. He's more likely to be in foul trouble or get injured. To me, I don't think it's as clear cut as one over the other. usually you see Mark go ahead of Dan in drafts, Mitch. So do you have a clear preference there? I think it's, if I look at them, Gafford's got easily the chance to hit top 35, whereas I'm not sure Mark Williams does.
Yeah, I think, well, so from what we've seen from last season, his first season in the NBA, where Mark Williams scaled up his minutes, his block rate didn't scale up quite as well as Gafford's did. I think that if I'm projecting who's going to be the better fantasy producer in, February and March, I feel more confident that's going to be Mark Williams than it is going to be Daniel Gafford, just because of, I don't know, potential moves or something that's going to change in a Wizards organization that really doesn't have much to gain in playing him 30 minutes a night. If I was to say that they both averaged 30 minutes a night, then it's probably Dan Gafford. But in my confidence in those things happening, it's Mark Williams. So it's kind of close. To me, I usually lean towards the safer side, and to me that feels like Mark Williams. But it's not much between them, to be honest.
You can also, I think in that one, and this is where I'm going to get to this in a second, but you could easily make an argument that because of Gafford's lack of backup, that he's a safer option, and if you might want to lean on that side. And when you're in that situation where you can argue relatively equally either way, then whatever choice you make doesn't matter. Like, it ends up being a bit of luck that nobody can foresee. Like, if Gafford plays 35 minutes a night, well, he's never done anything like that before. You didn't know that was going to happen. If Williams loses his job to Nick Richards, you have no way of being able to predict that. Nothing would tell you that. And when we can argue equally either side, it's like, don't stress yourself, well, this has got to be the right decision, because we've got all the information here, and we're still like, it's either one, right? We don't know which way it's going to go, so just do it. Just do whatever you feel, whichever uniform you like watching more. That's sort of how I would look at that.
Yeah, for sure.
Jules asked a question that I've got a few times, and I'm honestly surprised I keep seeing this question. Jules says, I've got any thoughts on Sasha Vezenov? Is he worth an 11th or 12th pick in a 12-team league? And I saw someone said, hey, should I grab Vezenkov in round 11 and Vasily Micic in round 12? And I go, well, you've got to be European, because these guys have got no chance of doing this season. Like, anything I've seen from Vezenkov over in Europe, great, but watching the preseason, is he going to play 17 minutes a night? I know he was an MVP in Europe. He is not getting a big enough role, nor does he have a fantasy-friendly enough stat set to be able to provide that value in a low-minute role. He's not starting over Barnes. He's not starting over Murray. Is he going to even cut? How much is he going to cut into Trey Lyles' minutes? It would be an absolute waste to consider Vezenkov, I think, in a 12-team league.
Yeah, he's not the kind of player that can do enough in 20, 22 minutes a night, and he might not even get that. I don't think he's someone that really we need to watch. I think I picked him up in our 30-deep league, and even then I'm going to put him on my bench, and he's not going to be, someone I start in a 30-deep league. So he is probably someone, I don't even know if I'd put him on a watch list. Like, he's not someone that really is going to blow up at any point this season. I don't believe. I could be wrong. It would probably take several injuries, though, for that to be the case.
If you look at the Kings roster, right, there's talk that Kevin Huerter might come off the bench, right? So their starters would be Murray, Barnes, Sabonis, Fox, and Duarte, it looks like, right? So if you look at their bench, that means that Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter are coming off the bench. That means that Trey Lyles is on the bench, and Vezenkov. So I could easily argue that Vezenkov is the 9th guy in that rotation, which is not someone I'm touching, not even sniffing. But Jules, I would love to know if you, because it seems to be people who watched Sasha play in Europe and saw him win MVP and think he's going to have these huge roles. Someone said it to me about Micic. Well, if the Thunder are serious about winning, they'll just start him and play in 30 minutes a night. I go, bro, there is zero chance that is happening. Yeah. So just got to adjust how these European guys, without a clear path to minutes, are going to perform. As much as I think they're good players, it's just not going to be what happens.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure.
Someone asked a question, and now I've lost it, but the general vibe of it, Kevin Lee, who has stood out to you the most after the preseason games?
I mean, it's very context. Wemby looks amazing. He stands out a lot whenever he plays. In terms of adjusting my preseason or my numbers and my projections, the biggest mover to me has been Bilal Coulibaly. I did not think he would be featured or playing this many minutes early on in his career. I didn't think he'd be, able to kind of keep up as much as he has in his career. So he's probably the one that's moved the most.
Yeah, that's fair.
I try really hard not to overreact to preseason games in terms of stats and things. What I usually try to do is look at, matchups and position battles. So another player might be Jalen Johnson. I think there's a real chance that he starts opening night. Like, is he? I mean, I think he's better than DeAndre Hunter. Does the coach think that? Well, it's a different coach to what they had the last few seasons, so he very well could. So I think those two players are probably the ones that have increased or elevated themselves in my projections more than anyone. The guys who are more established, I tried not to weight too much into performances or things like that, stats or anything like that in the preseason. It's more those back-end guys whose roles and minutes were uncertain to me beforehand.
Yeah, I don't care what DeMar DeRozan's doing in preseason. It doesn't mean anything to me what these guys do. It is that, like, Dereck Lively started 2 games. Horton Tucker started all 3 games at point guard. That's interesting. That's a position battle that we didn't know. We didn't know what the Wizards' starting small forward would be. We thought Kispert or Avdia, but it looks like it's going to be Coulibaly. So, we have to bump that up in that scenario. So they're the things that you pay some attention to. Moving on from that, but also related to what Kevin didn't ask, but I'm going to ask. John Kuminga has been pretty good through the preseason. He's been very good through the preseason. He had 40% usage last game. He's at 34% usage over this time. So everyone is going to hype up this guy, number 7 overall pick 3 years ago, ready for his breakout. I just don't see the path for it, Mitch. And people will twist themselves in knots. And someone said... I get in, not arguments, but debates with people, and they're like, well, he'll just take Jordan Poole's minutes from last season. No, he won't, because Chris Paul will take those minutes. And he goes, yeah, but then DiVincenzo's gone. Yeah, but the reason DiVincenzo played 26 minutes is because Wiggins played 30 games. And I just don't see how do they maneuver that rotation to get Kuminga to, A, get enough usage or play even 25 minutes a night. I know he's been impressive, but... is this the Tari Eason of last preseason? Is it the Taylor Horton Tucker of 2 preseasons ago? Like, I don't... finding those minutes, or being featured the way he has been just seems impossible.
Yeah, I think, well, the whole thing about the Warriors and the narrative for them has been, they've got 6 starters or whatever, how they're trying to spin it in terms of in the media. And those 6 starters does not include Kuminga. So you've already got a bit of a logjam when it comes to players getting a lot of minutes in their sort of top 5, top 6 players. Kuminga might be the 7th guy there, but how many 7th players in an NBA team are actually valuable fantasy players? There's not a whole lot of them. And a lot of the times those players that are either super elite and super efficient from the field, they're enormous steals and blocks guys. Like, maybe Kuminga can do that, but I haven't seen too much to suggest that so far in his career. He's not going to be a guy, like you said, that gets enormous usage, because at any one point they're going to have 2 of those guys out of Wiggins, Clay, Steph, Chris Paul out on the court. Draymond hasn't played so far this preseason, so we always need to keep in mind who is playing, who is not playing. I don't think we've seen the Warriors fully healthy in any preseason games. So always remember who's playing and who's not when you're looking at a player's opportunity in the team. So I don't... talking about those other guys that elevated, to me, Kuminga, I've been more impressed because I've been down on him. But in terms of my view on his opportunity, it hasn't really changed since the preseason because, those other guys haven't played.
I agree. Look, if Draymond's out, sure, he's got that big opportunity. But, you're right. Like, 7th man, and then, there's still Moody and Payton in that second unit as well, and even Šarić, who, they might not be as good, but they're going to get playing time. So that'll make it interesting. Mitch, that will bring us to the end of our little segment here. So thanks for coming on, and people can go catch you over on the Ball Boys Fantasy channel. And good luck for the lead up to the season.
No worries, mate. Thank you for having me on. Always a pleasure.
Let's get our next guest ready to go. Bring him in. We'll just make sure we've had a perfect attendance record so far. No issues with anybody, which we hope continues on. Who have we got on this next little segment as we bring it on? Fingers crossed. Is he going to be here? He is here. Wow, we have nailed this again on time. All these guests, absolutely fantastic. Adam Stock is here from Elite Fantasy Basketball. Adam, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Back-to-back years.
Back-to-back years on this show, and we're actually on the Roto World Draft show together as well a couple of weeks ago. So we're just talking to each other a bit here. Now, this is not a specific question that someone is asking right now, but it is something that someone asked earlier on. And you have your website, Elite Fantasy Basketball. You do a bunch of stuff regarding punting and setting things up that way. Now, I have been very strong this offseason in talking about if you be really focused on narrow pairings of what you do, and if you don't understand how it works, you can tie yourself in knots and lead yourself to mistakes. Now, you do these very detailed punt guide write-ups. You might have a differing opinion on that. My general thing is I think searching for value usually trumps things, because trumps these very specific pairings because you can put yourself in trouble if you don't understand how that works, or grabbing a guy too early because he is the perfect guy that fits your team, and then that eliminates some of that value. How do you push back on that at all? How do you view that sort of theory?
No, I generally I agree with that. Like pairing's important, but it's more so about avoiding guys, I would say, who are just like terrible fits.
Yes.
What you want to do versus getting like the number one guy, Like there's probably guys in two that are better fits for the first round picks than say like Ant or something. But then Ant brings a lot of other stuff. Like he has a high games played floor, like what you're going to be getting when the fantasy playoffs roll around. So even if he's not like the perfect fit, maybe some other guy looks better in the tools and whatnot. I'm not getting too caught up in that. It's more so like if this is like a baby version of it, but if you want to punt assist or something, like be careful with Trey, all that stuff, or be careful with pairing two injury prone guys. Like I would definitely if you go risky at the end of the first, you definitely want to play it safe, like go with that over the perfect per game fit kind of.
Yeah, that's what I said at the start. If you're taking Kawhi, with the uncertainty around James Harden, I probably don't want to add him in round 3 there because there's just too much uncertainty with that group. And to me, pairings and builds and that sort of stuff, it's about avoiding the things that are bad, because you can find ways to build teams in, honestly, hundreds of different combinations. We've got 13 picks in a standard draft, and you can, at each spot, there might be 5 or 6 different guys who make sense. Yeah, because if you get one guy in this round, then you go a different direction this round, and then go here different that way, versus like, here are the 12 guys that you must pick at every spot. Because if you don't get it, you're going to be, well, I've got to get it. Then I'll reach up 2 rounds early, and then you eliminate all value, and then your team is not particularly strong. So my advice is always, if you are asking all the questions about perfect pairings, you probably just want to be like, who do I avoid versus which guys do I narrowly target in on? And that will probably lead, I think, to more success. All right, let's have a look here. Are there any players, this is an interesting question from Premium Blender, are there any players that are making a positional switch from like the 4 to the 5 that are on your radar for improved output? Last season, one of those ones was Anthony Davis moving to play more at the 5. It improved his block rate, his rebound rate. Hopefully he doesn't play more at the 4 this season, although I believe that narrative is somewhat overblown, Adam. I think they're going to end up starting Taurean Prince, or it's Jared Vanderbilt, who honestly plays as a 5 anyway. Anyone that you can think of that's in a positional switch type scenario that might bump their value up?
Positional switch. That's a really tough question, actually.
Well, let me bring
the switch center is usually the most obvious, just because that actually has a direct impact on rebounds and blocks. But with other positions,
here's the one that's been discussed earlier in this chat that I saw people talking about. Is we saw last game, Jeremy Sochan started a point guard for the Spurs. Yeah. Now, if he plays as a hybrid 3-4, often those players, unless they're the elite of the elite, they're missing in the fantasy basketball sphere. They do little bits and pieces here. If he moves to point guard, he might average, say, 5.5 assists, which puts a significant boost on his overall value, if that is what happens. But if he goes back and he's the starting 3 or the backup 4 and backup 3, then his value drops down significantly. But we just don't know where he's going to be. And as a general rule, if you move to play at the 1 or you move to play at the 5, it is easier to get assists playing at the 1. It is easier to get rebounds, blocks playing at the 5. The 2, 3, 4 are relatively interchangeable. So you're looking for guys who are pushing to those positions, I would say, as a general sort of rule across those scenarios.
Yeah, I think one guy who would probably fall into that basket is probably Scottie Barnes. I guess we'll kind of see how the Schroeder Trent thing kind of plays out over the year. The year kind of goes on. Like, it looks like Schroeder's probably the favorite right now, but are they going to stick with that if all of a sudden it looks like last year and nobody can shoot? So we'll see. So you got Scottie as kind of a point forward versus an actual point guard. There'll be a difference there.
Yes. I 100%. And you're right. Schroeder is going to start because, as I have maintained, Scottie Barnes, you might think that he is a point guard, but I don't think he can run a half-court offense. And I think that if they were running him as that primary guy the whole time, it would be bad. And that's why they're not doing it. And I guess the debate is like Schroeder's shooting versus Trent versus Schroeder's offensive organization versus Barnes, and it appears like the offensive organization has won out. So Barnes is in a situation where he'll get a few more ball handling opportunities, but it's not you are Ben Simmons now and you're running the entire situation. So yeah, we need to be a little cautious on that. Trounce says, do you think Obi Toppin will solidify himself as the starting power forward?
Probably not.
Yeah.
I just don't think he's that guy, and I don't think the Pacers want him to really. I think they'd rather have Walker come in and take it. Although we'll see how much they really unleash him. We saw with Mathurin last year, even though he was playing really well, they kept him somewhat limited for most of the year. So I don't know. Maybe Toppin will have. I don't think it's going to be like a Jalen Smith situation last year, but I'm not too high on Toppin.
Yeah, I don't think he's very good. Right, he is a guy that if there was a perfect team fit, it's here, playing next to Miles Turner and alongside Tyrese Halliburton, run and gun, lobs, someone who can protect the rim next to him. But he's also just not very good. So as soon as Jarris Walker starts to show that he's capable, now Rick Carlisle might do what he did with Benedict Mathurin last season and keep Walker off the bench all season. But that might mean that Toppin plays 25 minutes instead of 30 minutes and Walker plays 27 off the bench. Walker's got his own concerns in terms of shooting efficiency, and one of those guys that had that big first game in the preseason and then two other games that were not great, and they don't get mentioned. So not that he's clearly going to take over, but a lot of Pacers guys are going, man, Aaron Nesmith, like he's playing really well as well. So Toppin might start the season as a starter, and he might end up third string by the end of the year. That's distinctly possible too, and they go back to Nesmith as the backup, as the starter, and Walker as the reserve. Fine taking Toppin, but like you said, like confidence in him, no, you shouldn't. He's not good, and he's never proven it. So when you've got a top 8 pick behind him, you shouldn't have that level of confidence. All right, what else can we do here? I'll ask your opinion on this first. Irokanji says, have you changed your tune on Brandon Miller at all? He looked comfortable in the preseason. So first of all, I'll just get your opinion on Brandon Miller. What are you thinking about him in terms of value? Is he anything more than a last round flyer for you?
No, it's just a last round flyer. If he had better D stats in college, it'd be a little more interesting, but he's probably going to be inefficient points, threes, rebounds, and not much else as a rookie. So I guess with the rebounds laid, he could help in punt field goal percentage because you don't have to worry about his shooting. But he's really just a flyer to me. They still have a lot of good scoring options there. He's still going to be behind Ball, Rozier. I guess we'll see what Hayward looks like. He's getting up there, but I'm not too interested. Definitely watching him, but I'm not too interested.
The Bridges situation helps Miller, obviously. Now, if Bridges inexplicably comes back and plays, then Miller's he's just not going to have that opportunity to play enough. And Steve Clifford doesn't like playing big minutes to rookies. Miller, I don't think he's good enough to be that guy. And you might say you've been impressed with him. Do you just see him throw down a big dunk that was called an offensive foul? Like, he's been okay, but I wouldn't say that he's blown us away. Like, he hasn't been awesome. He hasn't been getting high usage. He hasn't been racking up peripheral stats. And he's going to start off the season in a bench role behind Hayward and Washington. And even if he starts, he's probably like a 29-minute, 30-minute starter who is very far down the offensive pecking order, I would guess. And as you said, like, he doesn't bring those supporting peripheral stats, which helps guys when they're not putting that usage up. Like, he's not getting assists as a point forward. He's not generating big steals and blocks. He's not going to be getting rebounds over, Mark Williams or someone like that. So fine. The opportunity's there to get him in those last rounds as a flyer, but I don't have a huge amount of faith in him. All right, what do we look at here? This is an interesting question. Jared Stewart, how do you balance early season waiver moves, not wanting to miss on a guy but not moving off a guy too soon? That is a tough one, because I said this earlier on, Adam, is that you have you guys you take as your flyers. Like Keontae George was an example we used, and we don't know if he's going to start or what his role is going to be. But I'm happy to take some L's early on to wait for him to develop and see how they run things. But often the big time winners off the waiver wire are found in those early weeks. So I would be much more inclined to drop my 12th best player who's not a flyer, my 11th best guy who's not a flyer, whose upside is maybe the 100th best player. Get rid of that guy to grab the hot waiver wire player versus that guy that I'm waiting on to see if it clicks, because there's going to be somebody else who comes to replace that guy that you had as your 11th round draft pick. You will find someone to replace that guy or get close enough for it to matter. So I would rather drop a more established guy who's my 11th best player, hold that other guy who I'm waiting to see what happens, and then take that waiver wire flyer and understand that I will probably lose 1 to 2 of my first matchups, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but I agree with that. The one thing I would add is that I'd be careful about stacking too many of those kind of high upside flyers, because then you can kind of fall in love, and that can lead to problems too. As you said, the first week's pretty big, and most of these flyers that are going in the 13th round aren't going to hit. So you kind of have to be honest about your guys' upside too. I know it's easy to fall in love off preseason, or especially it's easy to fall in love with rookies in general, kind of. But you kind of got to be honest with yourself and kind of go into the season knowing which guys you feel comfortable. Don't wait or judge off the first maybe like game or something like that.
Guys, I know my camera is lagging, but unfortunately I can't go in and fix it because if I do, it'll end the stream. So you're just going to have to put up with me shaking and jagging all over the place. My voice is coming through okay, but the camera, unfortunately, I can't adjust it without ending the stream. Joe Simpson says, Josh is a perpetual Raptors hater. Welcome, Joe. Welcome to watching the show for the first time. I don't hate the Raptors. I just hate all Canadians. Simple. So as long as they remain in Canada, they're going to be the worst team that ever existed. It's really simple, Joe. But honestly, if you think I'm a Raptors hater, you just don't listen to anything that I say. So shout out to you.
As a Raptor fan and a Canadian, that to me that's fair. It's not like this is a team that you should necessarily be high on right now. You know, like there's some guys I like on the team, but I'm not exactly happy with the position they're in right now.
I've liked the Raptors, but I think to be fair, Adam, you have to question what the hell direction they've been going in the last 2 to 3 years, and. Yeah, people. Part of the reason people think that I hate the Raptors is like, hey, Scottie Barnes, I don't think he should have won Rookie of the Year, and I'm a little bit questioning how high his upside is. And people go, nah, man, he's going to be a star. He's going to be awesome. Okay, I just have a different opinion on it. I just don't see him being that guy. And last year I was right. We'll see what happens this season. We'll see.
Yeah, I love Raptors fan base sometimes, but there's just situations where like Scottie's a messiah to some. Like the Fred stuff just got out of hand last year, where it just got to the point where I just stopped reading Raptors stuff because you would have thought like Fred burnt down half the city.
Yes.
So passionate fan base always the most reasonable, probably not.
Yeah, they are. They are very passionate. Philip says, I can't believe you have not had a Wemby discussion. He's saving it for last. Let's do it now. Wemby. He's looked unbelievable in the preseason. I was obviously extremely high on him as a draft prospect. He was that guy that, if you were in a dynasty league, we're saying take your number 3, right? If you want to take your number 1, do it. Right? That's how good. But we had some concerns about how it would all translate across. First up, in terms of how would they look at his minutes? Would he be slightly inefficient? He's been even better than I expected in these games. And now, Adam, I would suggest that you probably have to take him in round 2. To get him on your team. The fun factor of having him is important. He will do minimum 10 things this season, I reckon, that you've never seen anybody do. We've already seen it in the preseason. He dunked on somebody from outside the restricted area without running. Like he dunked on Thomas Bryant. He stood outside the restricted area and dunked on him, and Thomas Bryant looked to the bench. Are you seeing this shit? Like, what am I supposed to do with this? He's getting steals off guys while standing outside the 3-point line and guarding someone while they're at the free throw line. Like, this shit's unbelievable. It's fun. Is he going to have some risk with injury or resting or minutes? Yeah. Are you going to go with him in round 2?
In a fun league, and maybe in Roto. If in a serious money league, probably three at the earliest. I guess I can't say at the earliest because he's never going later than that at this point. But I would probably look the 3 at that point. Vassell's probably going to crush it this year too, but we just can't trust what's going to happen in March. And you can't just kind of wing it and hope for the best. You got to be realistic about these things. And as fun as he's going to be, if he picks up a hangnail in early March, that could be a week or 2. We saw last year, they were just shifting guys in and out. Are they going to do that again? They could. One of the risks with the Spurs, they don't want to get too good too fast. If they're a surprise team this year, that probably isn't necessarily good for their long-term outlook. Vassell's nice, but you want another blue chip guy there beside Wemby. And that's what they're probably thinking.
That's the risk, isn't it? Because that sort of happened to Dallas as Luka was too good. And it takes them out of that positioning to get another top 5 sort of a pick. And while the draft's not necessarily the strongest, like an Olivier Sarr or a wing sort of Ron Holland type of player, or one of the guards that are coming through, because they obviously desperately need a point guard, would be really interesting. So we'll see what they do. JP, the Brandon Miller hate is real. It's not. It's just an assessment, my guy. Like, it's just like, do I think he should have gone number 2? No. Do I think he's been super impressive? Also, no. Like, that's not hate. Yeah. It's just a different opinion on guys. All right. Well, we mentioned this already. Jose said he's Devin Vassell a top 50 category league player. I think he could be.
On a per game basis, sure. Will he get their totals? Probably not, but he'll be good when he's out there for sure. I mean, he was top. I think he was around top 50 last year before he got hurt.
Yeah,
too, so
he was close.
Probably, yeah, around there.
Dylan says, I picked Chet over Walker Kessler the other day, one of my drafts. Do I really think he is the better pick? Yes, I do. Because I am, at this point, again, with Chet, it's very hard to be super bullish on rookies until I see him. And I was a little bit more down on Chet. I didn't know how much he'd play, but he's awesome. I had him number 1 in that draft class. Like, I think he's really good. And he looks awesome. Yeah. My Kessler problem is that he's a field goal percentage player. Sure, low volume. Blocks, awesome. Rebounds, sure. Everything else, nothing. Right? It's actually bad. Like, he might give you no threes, 0.1 steals, 0.3 assists. Really bad in that area. And as we've seen in the preseason, he hasn't been the best shot blocker in the preseason. He's had like one good game, but others were down, and he will block shots, but that doesn't mean that he's just going to get those big numbers every game. And I think we overreact to those high block guys when there are plenty of other block guys who can provide more. And I'm just down on Kessler when he was going in that round 3 area. And to me, he's a guy that you look at in the 50s more.
Yeah, for me, it kind of depends on what you're doing. Like, let's say you want to punt free throw percentage with Luka, for example. I think Kessler's going to be pretty attractive somewhere in 4, and especially if he's in 5, just because he can give you a little extra in rebounds and field goal percentage. Chess probably going to be pretty nasty in blocks. I'm sure Kessler will top him, but it'll be pretty nasty there as well. I guess you could also talk about durability. I mean, they're so young in their career. It's hard to say either way, but obviously Chad is a bit of a risk in what happened last year, and given his build is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like Wemby. We haven't really seen guys like this, so who knows, to be honest. And it's also 2023. You can say these giant draft-like dudes haven't really stayed healthy in the past, but that was the past too. Guys are better with injuries these days.
That is 100% true. And Adam, that brings us to the end of your time. So thank you for coming on, having a chat with me, and people can go check you out over on Twitter and at Elite Fantasy Basketball.
Thanks for having me, Josh. That was fun.
All right, let's bring the next guy in. Can we keep this momentum running of people being in the room on time? I think we will. This guy is usually pretty good at this. Let's see if he is here. I think you know who it is because I told you we were going to be doing back-to-back Adams. So Adam King is here. He is in the room. We are connecting through to Kingy right now. Adam King, welcome. You're back in Australia, mate. You're back in where are all the trees gone in your kitchen?
I am back. I've been back for 9 hours. We landed at about midnight last night, so I'm very jet lagged. And all the plants, my wife moved them all strategically for when we were away, so that they wouldn't die.
All right, so no more poison ivy lair going on in the background. We're all ready to go with a regular looking kitchen here, Kingy. But we have got questions that I'm sure that people have for us fantasy basketball. So let's what questions do we have here? Well, let's go through one. Buzzer Beater says, could you rank Bilal Coulibaly, Jalen Johnson, and Paul Reed from 1 through to 3? I want to hear your answer before I give mine.
Okay, so quickly off the top of my head, I'd probably go. I'd have Bilal third. I'd probably have. I don't know. I think I might have Jalen Johnson, Paul Reed, Bilal Coulibaly, but I could have Reed first as well. It's one of the bad things, just quickly, about being in Europe. God, the games do not line up with their time zone. So I have not been able to watch anything, but I did see Jalen Johnson's game the other night. Very small sample size, but he looked really good. So, yeah, I think I'd have Johnson, Reed first and Bilal third.
Okay, this is how I'm looking at this, is A, they all need to be drafted, right? B, they're close enough that either way, whatever, it's going to be okay. The best per minute producer out of that group is Reed. It's followed by Jalen. It's followed by Bilal. But the player most likely to start is Bilal. So how do you view those things? Minute security versus per minute production? That's the tough question. I think that the mixture between the two is Jalen Johnson, who probably gets more minutes as a median outcome versus Reed, but also is a better per minute producer than Coulibaly. So that's, if you want to be a little bit more safe with it, you do that. But I can't, and this is so many fantasy basketball decisions, right? You can't sit here and definitively say the differences between these guys are very clear and able to be ranked as strongly as that. You can have an opinion, I can have an opinion, 10 other guys can have an opinion, and if someone is right and this guy's first and this guy's second, it doesn't matter. These guys are so close in terms of that unknown that we don't know. Nobody knows how they're going to play out, but it's about what you want to value. Coulibaly is probably going to start. The other two probably aren't, but they are better per minute producers. So you want to just take that flyer on Paul Reed, who might be top 70, or Johnson, who might be top 80, then do it. Or do you want the security of minutes? In general, towards the end, I'll go a little bit more on that upside. So I'd probably take Jalen and then Reed and then Bilal, but they're so close, man.
It is, and it depends where you're getting them as well. I mean, Reed was starting to go at pick 90, which is too high.
It's crazy.
So it depends at what range, but beyond 110, who cares?
Exactly. Harry Hung says, do I see Franz going on a mini Lowry-type leap this season? No, I don't. And the reason I don't, Harry, not that I don't think Franz is a talented player, because he is. I think he's a very good player. He was very clearly the Magic's best player last season. He is in a situation where he tends to defer quite a bit offensively. Lowry went to the Jazz as the number one offensive guy, like as the guy who had the clear pathway to improve his usage and improve his minutes. Now, I bumped him way up from what his ADP was. He entered last season with an ADP of 120. I had him in the 60s and I was drafting him there consistently, and he outstripped my expectations. But nothing's changed in terms of the Magic and the offensive role that Franz is likely to carry. He's still going to be behind Paolo Banchero. Markel Fultz is going to be initiating. There's Cole Anthony still there. Like, nothing's changed on that team to make me think that there is this clear pathway for Franz to change significantly from what he did. Incremental improvements, sure. Big jump, probably not.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd like to see it, but as you said, he's not the number one option. Paolo Banchero is going to be their go-to guy offensively. Even in the World Cup, Franz Wagner probably deferred a little bit too much than he should have. So, I think he'll be good. I think he'll probably be top 50. But I don't see him doing what Lauri Markkanen did last season.
No, sometimes you just need that real pathway to do that. And with Paolo Banchero there, it's just unlikely that he gets that opportunity to step up into a role that's that size. That just seems unlikely. Brenda says, have you got any limit philosophy on the number of guys that you draft from the same team? Kingy?
I probably do. I mean, I'd probably, if I was looking at my squad and I had 3 Knicks players, I would probably go, I don't want a 4th. But I'm probably not going to let that impact me taking a clear best player available or someone who I really want on my team. I've talked about this on the Insight Fantasy with those guys and about stacking. If you've got a favorite team and you want some players and fantasy's meant to be fun, draft a few guys if you can get them in the right spots. But obviously, yes, if you've got a team that's got a really bad playoff schedule or something like that, you don't want to have 5 guys from one team or anything like that.
I think you're right about the number there. Like 3 guys, if you got 4, it probably is 1 too many. But I'm not. If I've got 3 guys from one team and then there's an upside flyer wanting round 12 and he's from the same team, I don't care, because if he hits, then I'll just figure the other stuff out later on. That's not the issue there. The ones, and again, playoff schedule, the ones that I want to be careful of, like I don't want to take Luka and then Kyrie in round 1 and round 2 to get 2 games from both of them. That kills you, right? But I'm not going to be like, I can't take any Hornets player or I can't take Brandon Miller and Mark Williams in round 8 and round 12 because they've got 2-game weeks. Like, if Miller does pop, which I don't think he does, but if he does and becomes a 7th-round player and Williams becomes a 4th-round player, well, the value I've extracted from those draft picks makes up for those 2-game weeks in that position. So it's all relative there. As if you want to set a rule, which you probably shouldn't set a hard and fast one, 4's too many, 3 is fine, but it really depends on where you're getting them. Like, if you go back to back to back, like in the first 3 rounds with someone from the same team, that probably leads to some concerns. If you've got multiple early picks on a 2-game team, the Lakers have a 2-game week, the Hornets have a 2-game week, the Mavericks have a 2-game week in the playoffs. In the playoffs that I suggest ending March 24th, and there's one other team, and I can't remember it. I think it's the Wolves, but you got to be cautious about stacking those guys early on. But in terms of that term stacking, Kingy, I've been hearing it come up a lot more in fantasy basketball. And it just isn't a thing that does anything. Like in fantasy football, it is, because if you have a quarterback that throws a touchdown to a receiver, they both get points. They both amplify. Yeah. In fantasy basketball, it doesn't matter if they play together or they play on different teams. They still do their thing. Now, you can make an argument if one of those guys gets hurt, the other one can up his production, but that also doesn't always work. So I just think that maybe we sometimes look for terms that get used in other fantasy sports and try and apply them like a handcuff, and it doesn't really apply to the game that we play that much.
It doesn't, no. I think for me, it's more just a term, like a fun term relating to, hey, I like Indiana is one for me. I like Indiana, so I'm going to get Halliburton in the first, Turner in the 3rd or the 4th, and then Bruce Brown in the 10th round. So I just call it stacking because I've got 3 guys from one team that I like. But as you said, it doesn't mean anything.
The one strategy you always should use to default is value. Like, don't worry about stacking. Don't worry about what team they're on. If you get a guy who you think is going to be a top 50 player and he's sitting there at 90, you take him. All those other things don't matter anymore. Now, he might not get to top 50, but if you firmly believe, hey, why is everybody sleeping on Chris Paul when he's going at 95? I think he's still going to be a top 60 player, top 50 player. Well, you take him. It doesn't matter if you've got 2 other Warriors early on. It doesn't matter about any of this stuff, because if that actually works out, that trumps everything. Like, getting 4 rounds of value changes everything. You can paper over any other mistake, really, if you hit on a couple of those things. And that should always be, I think, your overriding value on, or your overriding decision. Like, if you're looking for tiebreakers, it's like, can this guy jump 4 rounds? And if the answer is yes, then he's the guy I want here. That's as a general thing as we get further, I think, down a draft. Marshall says, what's my standing on Gobert and Ayton this season? High-level producers that fell off last season. Well, I don't know if Ayton's a high-level producer. Gobert did fall off last season. I worry, is it age? Is it scheme? Were his blocks down for that reason? I think that Ayton should go ahead of Gobert, but it's not unreasonable, Kingy, to think that Gobert comes back and blocks 2 shots a game again.
Yeah, I'm not that high on either of these guys. Gobert, I don't know. I do worry that he's done. Not done. I mean, he's going to contribute. He's going to be good, but I just don't know if he can get back to where he was 2 years ago. I think it is age. I think it's a bit of his lateral mobility. There's a few things there. Ayton, I know he's in a really good spot now. He's seen a bump because of his role and who he's playing for. But if you remember back to when he was playing for Phoenix when they were bad, he complained a lot, and his body language on the court, it sticks with me quite a lot, because he almost had a sook, had a win.
He's a whinger, yeah.
Yeah, and so if his team is not winning, I know he's in a position and he's all about dominate, and I've seen all that stuff, but I worry that he's just going to sort of take his ball and go home if they're not winning, and he's going to have another whinge and not play. So that is my hesitation on him. But I would take Ayton above Gobert, I think.
It's easy to see Gobert jumping back up, but who knows? Like, we don't know how they're going to run that. Matt asks a question which is not as important, Matt, sorry to you, in the specifics here, but more in the general thought. He's like, what are my thoughts on Zubac in a ESPN points league where rebounds are worth 2? Okay. The very simple answer here when looking at this, Matt, is don't worry about, like, I need to target a guy because rebounds are worth 2. What do you think he will average in fantasy points? It doesn't matter how he gets there. It doesn't matter any of these things, whether rebounds are worth 2 or they're worth 1.3 or whatever it is. If you look at what he averaged last season, do I see Zubac's role going up or down? How do you view that? Just look at what the fantasy points are. Some people will often say, man, I need to target my assists earlier. Like, oh, you're in a category. No, I'm in a points league. No, you don't. You just need to target the higher fantasy points players. So look at what Zubac was able to average last season. I would look at what he did last season, Matt, and think, there's a full season now of Mason Plumlee, so I think his minutes are actually going to drop down, and we saw that towards the end of last season. So what he averaged per game in your ESPN points format, you probably want to take a little bit off the top of that, and that's how you get an evaluation without looking at, like, my specific projections or something like that. Is that how you would see that, Kingy?
Yeah, I think so. I think Plumlee does impact him. And, I mean, what's a rebound normally worth? 1.5 or something?
Yeah,
I mean, it
depends. In Yahoo, it's 1.2, and ESPN's at 2. Yeah.
Okay, so, and I don't think he'll be a double-digit rebound guy. I think he'll be closer to 9. So what are you looking at there? An extra maybe 5 points per game. But as you said, with Plumlee there for a full season, a healthy Kawhi, healthy Paul George, which we don't know if that's going to happen, but they could go small. They're talking about Robert Covington playing a bit more. So, yeah, it doesn't make a massive difference for me because I don't think he's going to be a huge contributor anyway.
No, look, I don't mind getting him in like a deeper league when we're talking more categories as well, because getting that rebound stability, but his upside's really low. But again, just look at what you think projected points are, or look at last year's points and make adjustments for the value without getting tied down in how they necessarily get there. Because unless it's a rookie, you've got an idea of how they produce. Okay. Sean. Oh, actually, King, your time is over, but do you want to stay for a couple more minutes for one more question?
Sure.
Sean says, what are my thoughts on Cam Thomas in a points league? Yeah, that one big game early on in the preseason. What are you thinking about Cam Thomas?
I've heard you talking about him again. I haven't seen a lot of the Nets, but I think they're about to play shortly. So I'm going to go and watch them play and see what they look like. In a points league, look, if you want to take a flyer on him in the last round, I think that's fine. Because as you've said, as many people have said, if he can carve out a sixth-man role and he can play 25 minutes a night, he could be like a Jordan Clarkson from like 5 years ago, or Jamal Crawford, or these guys that can score 20 points off the bench. And in a points league, that's valuable. His defense is pretty bad. We've seen them hesitant to play him because of that. So I'm not sold that he's going to play big minutes, but in the last round, I'd be okay to take a flyer on him.
I think I don't know, actually. You'd say sixth man, but also they've got Royce O'Neal and Dorian Finney-Smith who are also going to be sixth men. And Dennis Smith's going to be in the mix there. Cam Thomas needs a very, very specific set of circumstances to be able to produce. He needs everyone else to get out of the way, and he needs to play, like, let's say 25 minutes, but needs to have 30 usage. And it's just so unrealistic for that to be a regular occurrence for him. We saw it happen when there was like 6 blokes out last season for 3 games, and then he went back to scratching his ass on the bench. And I think he's going to have a crack at having a rotation role, but I've also been told that the Nets he just refuses to change the way that he plays, and they're annoyed at it. And they go, well, this doesn't lead us to winning, so change or we're not playing you. And that's basically what happened last season to simplify that whole idea. All right. Kingy, one more, or you got to go?
No, I don't. I'm on holidays. I have nothing.
That's right. You bloody came back from overseas. Let's chuck one more to you, and then we'll get ready for the next guest. Axie Pressman. Why is Luka Doncic not a clear second pick or third overall pick? Over to you, Adam King.
Why can't he be? I'm okay to take him second or third in a draft. I think I did. So obviously the free throws, that's what people are going to say. The free throws are an issue, but they don't bother me really. I think you can get to 80% potentially. I like to be a glass half full. So, I think for me, I'm okay taking him second or third if you want to. I think Jokic is number 1, and I think you could probably make a case for 3 or 4 guys at number 2.
Here is my thing. I don't care about his free throws. His assist rate dropped significantly when Kyrie Irving arrived. It didn't plummet to the depths of Hades, but it did drop. But really, really clear here, Axie Pressman. He plays 2 games in the playoffs in 1 week. I don't want my first-round pick playing 2 games when there are other guys who are equivalent in Shea, Embiid, and Halliburton in that zone. That is why I wouldn't take him at number 2, because he has a 2-game week and there are other guys who are close enough in his value that I'd rather just have them. Like that's the simple answer to that question. If he was the guy that was head and shoulders ahead of everybody, like Jokic, who had a 2-game week last season, I would still take him in that spot. If he, and I'm not saying you don't draft Luka in the first round, but these are guys who are all relatively similar, and very easy arguments could be made for Shea or Halliburton or Embiid in that area, but one of them plays a 2-game week. You don't take the guy with a 2-game week who's got the new teammate, who's also currently dealing with an injury to his calf that I don't know what's going to happen with that. So that's why he's not the clear number 2 pick, I think. Or not I think, that's exactly why I wouldn't take him at number 2. Alan Sagoon says, can you try to talk about Morant? I can try. We've done it already, but thanks for tuning in now. King, I'll let you give the thought process on Ja, who's obviously out 25 games. He can't be stashed in IL on Yahoo, but he can in IL Plus, and ESPN in all of their, I think, poor decision-making with this one, changed him to not be IR eligible. So where do you take Ja Morant? I would argue that in an ESPN league, in a standard settings with 3 bench, you can't. I don't think you can draft him in that setting.
Yeah, that's probably tough. I'm not in any ESPN leagues, thankfully, and only one Yahoo. So on FanTracks, he's fine as well. You can just drop him straight into your IR spot. I haven't drafted him anywhere. I think he's going around 70, 80 in most spots. I mean, he's going to miss 25 games is minimum. I mean, you have to remember that as well. He tends to get injured, not seriously, but his style of play means that he's going to get ankle injuries. He's going to get bumped. He's going to get 25. I'd say he probably misses 30 at least, barring any long-term injuries, which means he plays 50 games. And I know games played aren't at the level they were 5-10 years ago. But 50 it's still a big chunk of the season.
Also, King, he plays 50, but most leagues aren't playing the final 2 to 3 weeks of the season as well. And when we look at players' overall games played totals at the end of the year, we'll say they played 71, but that's because they missed 5 games in April, right? So he's in that situation where he's not, like, the games he misses, we know they are going to be in the portion of the season that counts for fantasy. So it's not like we know he's missing 25 games, but 7 of those are going to be after your playoffs are over. We know when these are happening. They are happening to start the season. And holding a 0 for 6 weeks on a roster with only 3 bench, where you have to use each of your guys every day, basically, makes it very hard to recover from. And in a category league, Kingy, he's not even a top 50 player.
No.
So, like, in a points league, very different, like top 15 guys. So maybe you can withstand that. But it's also going to depend. Like, if you've got Ja Morant and then you cop 3 long-term injuries in week 1, well, you just can't do that. Like, if you thought you might be able to get through it and hold the 0, you can't. Yeah, or you've got, like, really restrictive limits on streaming. You can only make 3 ads per week, so you can't make up that 0 through streaming. So many factors. And again, in category leagues, he is not that good. So that alleged upside that you think you're getting, like, if you're taking him at 100, sure, but also, no matter if you're taking him at 100 or 130, if you have to sit on a 0 for 6 weeks, you're sitting on a 0 no matter where you took him, and that just might be unrecoverable from.
That's right. And and as you said, that was my last point, is that in a category league, he really only helps you in points and assists. He's a decent rebounder. He'll get maybe a steal, but his percentages are bad. He turns the ball over. He doesn't hit threes. So he just doesn't help you in that many categories. So I haven't drafted him anywhere, and I'm not really going out to draft him.
No, I haven't either. And Kingy, that'll bring us to the end here. I get myself a couple little solo questions for our next guest gets ready. Thank you for coming on, and welcome back to Australia.
Thank you. Good to be on, and we'll chat again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, the next guest that is coming on, assuming that he is in the room, we've had a perfect attendance record so far. We're going to be having John Corrales from Locked On Celtics come on. So if you've got any Celtics-specific questions, especially about the rotation, Porzingis, Derek White, Drew Holiday, Payton Pritchard, get those questions in, and we'll get those things specifically going in with John when he is here and ready to go. So we're going to have a Celtics expert on to answer some Celtics questions. Chris Carvajal says, is there anywhere I can find your player rankings for categories this year? These feel like they are fake comments that get put in here so I can tee up a promo. Sure, basketballmonster.com. You may have heard me mention it at the start of all 4,000 shows that I've done. That is where I work. That is where we do projections. That is where everything you want for fantasy basketball sits. basketballmonster.com. Don't ask me thoughts questions, guys. It's just too it's too broad. It doesn't mean anything. Trey yells at me by saying, Coulibaly isn't starting over Denny. Okay. Maybe. Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. I don't know. How much faith has this team put in Denny Avdia through 3 seasons? The answer is 0. They haven't really given much to him at all. So maybe Coulibaly starts over Denny. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know how you can sit there with that level of certainty, though. Yes, Denny has been hurt in the preseason. Doesn't mean anything, though. Man, so many Ja Morant questions. How will the in-season tournament affect fantasy? It won't. At all. No impact. Don't stress about it. Don't make any decisions based on it. Won't impact fantasy at all. Okay. Is it not 9 weeks for Ja? Yeah, it probably is, Michael. I made that 6 weeks up off the top of my head. He's back at the start of December. So, it's more than, it's not 9. It's probably 7, actually. But anyway, he's back at the start of December, 25 games. The suspension isn't getting reduced. He says, assuming the suspension doesn't get reduced. It's not getting reduced, no. They said that it won't get extended. I don't know why they would say that, but it's not. Are there any spots in respective rounds that are more beneficial than others? I think if you're looking at that sort of stuff, Yellow Mamba, it's overthinking, right? You can't plan out a draft that way. You can't be like, well, I know every player is going to go at this spot, so therefore if I land myself in this position, I'm going to get the best player. Don't put your focus on that stuff. It's overthinking. It's diverting brain time and resources into something that really doesn't matter that much. Is Kevin Porter worth rostering? No, I don't think so. I don't think he's going to play for the Rockets. So, no, I don't think he's going to play anywhere. So, no, I wouldn't bother with him. Joe, will Kawhi play 60-plus games? That's a really good question. I tend to think he has a real shot of hitting 60 plus this season. Yes. Would I put money on it? I don't know. But I think he hit 60. Yes. Gil says, do I have any reservations about drafting both Tatum and Brown in the same points league squad? Gil, this goes back to that question that we said earlier. No. I don't pay any attention to the teams that players are on if I'm getting them at what I perceive to be value. Like, if I think that Jaylen Brown is going to be the 45th best player, even with the addition of Porzingis, and he's available for me at pick 49, and I took Tatum at pick 8, then I will take Jaylen Brown there. And I know you're asking specific Celtics questions, but that one's not one that John's going to be able to answer anyway. Will any player rank differ from ADP this year more than Larry? Gabe, if I knew the answer to that, then we'd all be millionaires, wouldn't we? Because then we would know that guy that we absolutely have to hit on. I think one player who's got a real shot at that is Daniel Gafford, who you could get outside the top 100, and if it actually pops for him, he might be top 40. But if I knew the answer to this, then yeah, it would be pretty easy to do this job. Lucas says, how did I get into fantasy basketball? What's my favorite part about it? How did I get into it? Well, I played it. I played fantasy basketball. I had success doing it. I enjoyed it. And because I enjoyed it and because I got into it so much, I tried to consume content, and I didn't find that there was very much out there. And I thought that with my particular skill set that I have, some background in broadcasting a little bit, a deep love of stats and thoroughness, that I'd be able to provide something. So I did. I did it for free on my own website, and then I had caught the eye of other people who offered some paid jobs and went from there and snowballed into where we are now. Simple as that. I liked playing it. I enjoyed it. I saw something that I thought could be done, and I did it, and it worked for now. That's how I got into it. Don't ask thoughts questions, guys. It's just too broad. Any lessons from Lowry's breakout that can help us find the next Lowry? JP Lawrence. The lesson is Lowry went to a team where they had lost Donovan Mitchell, and somebody was going to need to step up into a bigger offensive role. I projected Larry Marketing to have a bigger offensive role, and as I said, I had him probably 50 spots ahead of rank and ADP last season, and I still was off by 30 or 40 spots. But that is the key. Usage and minutes are two of the biggest factors in fantasy production. So you're looking for someone who steps into a role, Jordan Poole, where they have an opportunity for more minutes and more usage than what they were getting the year before. People have become a lot smarter, even this year versus last year. Whereas Jordan Poole might have been ranked 90th last season. Well, he goes in the 40s now. And even that might be too low. But the ranks have been adjusted because we understand that usage and opportunity are two of the biggest things that really do contribute to those big rises. Jordan, I'm going to ask that question when John comes on. Let's have a look. Is John here ready to go? John is here and ready to go. So I'm just going to bring him into the show because it's Corrales time as we bring him in. Here he is. That is the wrong word thing that I should have up there, but doesn't matter. John is here. John, we've got Celtics questions straight off for you. Jordan asks about another Jordan. He says, Jordan Walsh, is he going to be in the rotation this season?
No, he's not. He's going to be spending most of the time in Maine in the G League. They let us know that basically from the beginning. He's not strong enough. He doesn't know all the tricks, all the defensive tricks that he's going to need to be the high-level defender they think he can be. And he needs to get some confidence in his shot. So I would not expect him to play this season at all.
Yeah, look, injuries will obviously change a lot of that stuff, but we know the Celtics have some depth issues, but there are guys like O'Shea Brissett. There's obviously Luke Cornett will get some minutes there as well. Svi Mykhailiuk might even play a little bit. There's whatever they do with the Derek White, Drew Holiday situation. And yeah, a second-round rookie who's got shooting concerns on a team that wants to win a title, they're just unlikely to be relied upon unless they really blow up. And yeah, I would say through preseason, those struggles have been relatively apparent at this point, which is totally normal for a 19-year-old second-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people got enthralled by Summer League results. Mm-hmm. But he's not ready. He shot very well in Summer League. And I know that they're tweaking some things. I mean, you could see it when I was watching him shoot at the practice facility. The ball was kind of coming off the ring finger than the middle finger. So they're really trying to focus on getting the ball to come off the right way when he's shooting. It's just going to take some reps, and he's not going to get the reps he needs against live action in the NBA. It's better to do that in the G League. And like you said, Shvi Mikhailuk has shown something. Sam Hauser, those wing guys. If you want a wing defender, O'Shea Brissett, Lamar Stevens, assuming both make the team, but there are other options to give what they're looking for, what they'll ultimately be looking for from Jordan Walsh, who I expect next season. Yeah, next season he could crack the rotation.
He is going to be the guy that I use quite often that when we assess summer league performance is that look who else is on the team. Like that is always going to be the key. Like if there are no other high level prospects on that team and he's putting up some okay numbers, it's because he's the only one there. He's not surrounded by 5 other top 10 picks like guys on the Rockets or the Pistons might have been. It was him and JD Davison really who were even on the Celtics roster, and somebody has to get shots and opportunities, and he got them. And then when you add the extra factor that he shot well, it makes everything look better and makes us think that he's in for a different type of regular season, which of course he is not. Firat says, and this hasn't been discussed much in fantasy circles, John, about Jason Tatum and his usage. Obviously, we are adding in Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis to this team that weren't there last season, replacing low usage guys like Marcus Smart, lower usage players like Malcolm Brogdon and Rob Williams. So the opportunity for shots is a little bit more squished. Now, my general principle on this is the top 1 and top 2 guys usually stay similar, maybe a slight drop, and it's number 3, Porzingis usually, who will be the guy that cops it. How are you seeing this shot distribution go between these guys? Is Tatum still going to be at that same level that he's been in past seasons?
I can't imagine that the Celtics want him to shoot less. If he does shoot less, it might just be a couple fewer threes that he was missing last year anyway. So yeah. I actually think he could end up just changing a little bit of his shot profile, changing the way he attacks, and averaging even more. Like he can get up to 32, 33, 34 points a game very easily by being just a little bit more efficient from 3, getting to the rim, getting to the line once more. You can add an easy 2, 3, 4 points a game just with a couple of little tweaks. So he may lose some of the usage, but I think he'll become more efficient with the usage that he gets. So if that question kind of intimates that his production will go down, I think no. His usage could drop slightly, maybe. And I think a welcome drop from him and the Celtics. Like I don't have to do quite as much. You can delegate some of that off to Holiday and Porzingis and Derek White and those guys. I think that's going to be welcomed by everybody, but I don't think you're going to see a drop-off in Tatum's production.
Last time we had you on, John, obviously the Drew Holiday trade hadn't gone down, and we were trying to debate starting lineup. So let's ask that question again. We saw Drew Holiday come off the bench in one of the preseason games. I guess the overall decision is probably going to be Derek White or Al Horford, but maybe we throw Drew into that mix. Who do you think who are the guys that do come off the bench? Like who is that guy that's going to be out of the top 6 that starts the games on the bench?
I think Holiday might be open to it.
Okay.
We just asked him in practice today, like a few hours ago, and he said, I don't care. I honestly don't care if I start. It's not about who starts, it's about who finishes. Mm-hmm. And so he could very well be open to not being part of the starting lineup. But Joe Mazzulla said, if we're worried about the first 6 minutes of the game, then you lose sight of the other 42. So he's setting up for somebody important to sit. We know somebody important is going to sit. My personal preference would be to have Al Horford sit.
Yep.
You get the shooting at the 5 all game long. But I can see a strong argument for Holiday sits. He comes in at the 5 or 6 minute mark, carries you over the second quarter break, and you have a point guard on the floor that you trust the whole time. And Payton Pritchard just kind of gets relegated to third guard duties, and you just kind of roll with it that way. I think either way is just as likely. The problem is the way the Celtics preseason schedule has gone. They played 3 games in 4 nights. So of the 3 games, we saw Tatum and Brown in the first game, and that's it. We didn't see him on the back-to-back. We didn't see him in that next game. So we haven't seen any hints of what the starting lineup will be. Now, tomorrow night against the Knicks at home, full complement after 5 days off. We'll see if he starts Holiday off the bench again, and then that'll give us a little bit more of an indication.
Yeah, the Holiday off the bench thing is not something I really thought would be happening, but I do understand that it could happen. I am with you. I would put Al Horford on the bench for a very simple reason to me, is that if you start Horford, that means that it's more work in shuffling rotations. Otherwise, you're relying a lot upon Luke Cornett to be that backup big man. If you bring Horford off the bench, then when Holiday or White, you can slot Payton Pritchard in there, and I have more trust in what Pritchard has been bringing. He's been really good in preseason versus having Luke Cornett as my backup in there. Plus, we know that Al Horford is going to conveniently have back spasms on every second night of a back-to-back this season. So other that would mean you're changing up the starting lineup, 15 times a year at minimum because of Horford's fact that he's going to sit those games. But I don't know how Joe's going to look at that, but that's how I would look at it. No, I have more faith in Pritchard than I do in Cornett, and then the less disruption to that group without injuries, I think would be better.
I agree. But also, the counter to that would be, well, you're disrupting who your sixth man is. You're disrupting the rotations. If Al Horford is missing those back-to-backs and however many that is, 17, 18 games, then somebody else is going to be your sixth man. And you're putting more, you might actually be putting more on Luke Cornett. We might see a substitution pattern where Holiday comes in for Horford and you go with single big, and then Horford and Porzingis start subbing in for each other. You start double big to be the biggest you can possibly be, set the tone defensively in the first 5-6 minutes of the game. You don't lose anything defensively by sitting, Holiday, because you do have Tatum and Brown and Dereck White. So you have good defenders anyway. You pick up a great defender off the bench now in Holiday. And I think you can minimize Luke Cornett to a point where you don't have to rely on him that much, even starting double big, because Tatum is like 6'10" now. So he can handle covering fours, most fours in the league. They're not Charles Barkley. They're not Karl Malone. So these guys nowadays are like your Evan Mobleys. So Tatum is fine in that role. So I think they can get kind of funky with the rotations and not have to go too heavy on Pritchard or Cornett or guys that are maybe a little less reliable.
Alexander Levin says, what is Dereck White's role going to be this season? Because there was some thought that Dereck White might have a really sizable role early in this offseason. I was a little bit more skeptical of that. But now, to me, he moves into like a much smaller usage position, less ball handling responsibilities a lot of the time because Drew Holiday is there. So I'm not, we know that they are sort of shallow in terms of depth overall, but to me, White is in a spot where it's less favorable for his overall individual production than what it was before Drew Holiday arrived.
Yeah, but I mean, aside from being D'Angelo Russell's mentor, I think Dereck White's role is going to be basically the same. He'll just like he did last year with Marcus Smart on the team and Malcolm Brogdon. He played off ball, he played on ball, he played a little bit kind of sort of wing. He played, direct ball handling, initiate the offense. I think he's going to have a big role. Like they understand exactly how good he is. And there's a reason why Holiday will be the guy coming off the bench. I don't think Dereck White is coming off the bench. I think he's starting. I think they want him to play big minutes. I think they believe in him. They believe in his shooting ability. They believe in him defensively. We saw him against Philly blocked 3 more shots. He's just so good at navigating defensively, and he's developing a very nice chemistry with Kristaps Porzingis on the pick and roll. Because White can hit floaters, you got to stay up and challenge. You got to respect Dereck White's ability to hit that shot. You stay up for another half second because he's the guy in the middle of the lane. and you let Porzingis just kind of slide behind you. They've already hit him for a couple of alley-oops with Dereck White and another one that was erased by a foul. So I like the chemistry that they're developing. I think Dereck White is going to have a nice, big, fat, juicy role on the Boston Celtics.
He's going to be so key to what they do in terms of winning that the difference there is for us in fantasy is like how many shots does he get, how many assists. He's going to be good, but he's not going to have that ability to push up into these big numbers.
Rebounds. He's going to get you assists. He's going to get you blocks. He's going to get you steals. He has the potential to get that 5-5-5-5-5 game.
He does.
So he's not going to be like he'll drop 25, every 2-3 weeks. He'll probably average like 14, 15 points. It's not horrible. He'll be efficient at it. He'll give you 3-pointers made. They're going to shoot a ton of 3-pointers. That's a stated like style for the Celtics. So Dereck White will give you a little bit of everything fantasy wise.
He does. He contributes right across the board. So that brings us to another guard then, John, but the guy that we talked about earlier who's been really dominant in the preseason, one of the best producers just across the NBA. He's had a lot of opportunities because a lot of guys have been out. And Payton Pritchard, they signed him to that extension. He's sort of been buried in the past. He's had maybe some informal trade requests, like give me a role. And they said, well, no, here you go. Here's a role. You've got a role now. What is that role? Is he a guy that they might be looking at 20 minutes a night? Is he going to be, because Drew Holiday might come off the bench, he's limited to that third point guard role? Can he play off ball as well? Like, how important is he in the overall night-to-night rotation of this team?
I think he's going to be pretty important in the regular season. But I also think that there are going to be nights, there might be the occasional night where he gets a DNP. Size is still an issue. He's 6'1". He's not tiny, but not big. And so it was telling to me against Philly where Tatum and Brown were out. Joe Mazzulla played the other four guys, Holiday, White, Porzingis, Horford, together for 17 minutes and 4 seconds. The 4 stints that they've played, or the 2 stints that they played, I'm sorry, were all together. So he didn't mix that up. And the first guy he put in there was Delano Banton.
Yeah, okay.
Not Payton Pritchard. And then in the second half, he brought Pritchard in and then subbed Pritchard out in that group and brought Banton in because I think size was an issue and they want to have some size on the floor with those guys. So I think if you look at the preseason production from Pritchard, he's done it out there with Tatum and Brown and Horford and White and him, and he's been getting a bunch of shots. He'll hit some shots for sure, but his big opening night was in the fourth quarter, 16 points in the fourth quarter of a preseason game when everybody else was sitting. When he gets those minutes, especially against other team second units, yeah, he'll get that shot. He'll hit shots for you, but I don't think that he's going to be a heavy rotation guy. I mean, maybe he'll get 12 to 15 minutes a night, but that's when he plays. And I think there will be, against certain matchups, nights where he's not going to get onto the floor.
There you go. Some sobering perspective on Pritchard. And again, context is important. How are the numbers being put up? Who's around? All that stuff is really important when digesting preseason performance. John, you'll get all the information from him over on Locked On Celtics throughout the season. It's going to be an interesting team to see how it all comes together. A big switch from last season. John, thank you for coming on and sharing your insights.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me on, of course.
All right, let's get ready for our next guest now, who, if I am correct with this, let's see if it goes. It should be... Is he here? Fingers crossed. Let's see. Is he here? No. So far, the only no-show. We'll see. He might get here. Not going to write him off just yet, but there was a question that I did see that was something that I can answer. Jack says, is my Durant metric favor people who produce more evenly across the board? No. All Durant is you can be used the exact same way that a traditional category ranking is used with Z-scores. It just accounts for the fact that Z-scores are useful to compare sets of data when the sets of data are normally distributed, which they are not in fantasy. So Durant helps to normalize those sets of data through a power transformation so that we don't get significant outliers that skew the overall value of somebody. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything different to that. It doesn't favor people more evenly across the board. What it does, I guess to a degree you can look at it, but what it does is it just takes the value of someone who gets really hurt by a low free throw percentage or gets a huge, gigantic boost because of high steals or high blocks and tempers those numbers down a little bit to provide a little bit more, I believe, realistic representation of what they produce. That's all it does. Back in to see whether this person is here. They are not. That's okay. We'll just keep answering questions until we see if someone else comes in. Let's have a look. Is Jalen McDaniels must roster? No, I think you mean Jaden. But even in a points league, Jaden McDaniels is not must roster. A, he's hurt. B, he's low usage. C, he gets into a lot of foul trouble. So no, he in a category league, he probably is, but he's pretty low in terms of overall value upside. Sean Tay King, I've talked about Dereck Lively already. I don't want to get too much back into him. GV says, can Austin Reeves return top 50 value this season? Top 50 is tough because Reeves is a guy that's value relies upon insanely high 2-point percentage and a very big free throw attempt rate and free throw percentage, but he brings no defensive stats. His value would hit top 50 if we had significant periods of time that LeBron was out. Definitely a possibility. But there's also the risk that D'Angelo Russell, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis take the ball out of his hands too much, especially Russell, limiting what Reeves can do. I would say that the top 50 is a very much outlier level of what's the word am I trying to think of? An outlier outcome for what Reeves can do, and it probably takes a few things that need to happen for him to get there. What's my outlook on Paul Reed? How many minutes he'll play? I've got him at about 20 or 21 at the moment, but it could very easily push to 27. We just have not seen this Sixers team with Harden and Embiid in the preseason to see how Reed is utilized. I don't know that he's going to start over PJ Tucker, but can he get all of those backup minutes? That's also what I don't know. So I've got it at about 20 minutes at the moment. B Baller says, how do I value the other starters next to Luka and Kyrie? Are any of them worth drafting in 10-team leagues? Well, let's go through it. Grant Williams, absolutely not. Josh Green, I expect to be the other starter. No chance. Dereck Lively, maybe. Now, in a 12-team league, yes, I would draft Dereck Lively. In a 10-team league, you only go 130 players deep. I still would take him in one of those last couple of rounds, understanding that it's probably going to be a situation where you move on. But he would be the only guy that I would consider in that sort of situation. Very important. What are your thoughts on the latest Loki episodes? Will I get a third TVA propaganda post? I'm considering it. They've got some pretty good posters this season on Loki. I've enjoyed the first 2 episodes quite a bit, actually. I'm really intrigued to see where it all goes. Loki was by far my favorite of the Marvel TV shows, I think, as most people had that thought process. And yeah, I think it's been pretty good in season 2. Nectario says, how do we look at Durant rankings on Basketball Monster? When you go to the projections page or the rankings page, there's a thing that says edit display columns. You check that, and then a bunch of different things that you can bring up on your screen, and Durant is one of those, assuming that you use standard categories. If you don't use standard categories, Durant has not been optimized for other categories yet. What are my thoughts on Dylan Brooks in 9-cat? I would not be interested in taking him at all. No interest in him whatsoever for category leagues. He just does not. He does not do it for me as a category league player. Yeah, he's just a low field goal percentage. I don't know what his usage is going to be. He doesn't generate big assists or bad or good. What am I saying? I don't know, because I've just realized that my guest is now here. So I think it might have been my fault that he wasn't in the room. But Sloan Piver from Sporting News, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I think I screwed you up there. I think I hit the wrong meet, and it looked like you weren't in the call, but you're here now. So we're here to answer some questions. So let's go through this. What about this one here from? All right, Gil. Malik Beasley, is he a starter by default in Milwaukee? What threats are there for the starter spot if he isn't? What do you think about that one?
Well, I don't think he's a starter by default, but I also don't really know what to expect out of that team at this point. I think Anthony Edwards is going to take such a big leap this year, and I think he's going to take on a lot more usage than he had last year. But I guess the question is, can Malik Beasley play point guard? Is Mike Conley going to take a step back?
Wait a sec, Sloan. Malik Beasley, Milwaukee. You're thinking last year. He's starting in Milwaukee, mate. He's going to be the Grayson Allen replacement. Is he the starter?
That's a bad start.
Is he? Hey mate, there's so much to keep track of. Is he started by default in Milwaukee? By default, I don't know, but he's going to start. I don't see any other way around it. The other option will be either Jay Crowder, Pat Connaughton, or Marjon Beauchamp. I think Beasley's going to be there, but what value does he bring? Like, he hits threes, and that's really about it. So look,
I think
he's a streamer.
I think that's the problem. Like, that's why, it's at first I'm thinking he's pinballing around. This is his third team in 3 years, right? So there's got to be some sort of issue that the coaches are seeing in his development. Maybe he's not adjusting to the team strategy. Yeah,
I think it's Minnesota, Utah, Lakers, Milwaukee. Yeah, fourth team. All right, Darius says, do I think RJ Barrett is going to have a breakout year? No, I don't. It's year 5 for RJ. Has he shown any improvement at all? Really? Not really. Show me. I'd like to see him do it for a year before I have any faith in him actually doing it. So I would lean towards no. What do you think, Sloan?
Yeah, I think you're holding on to a hope and a prayer with him. Every single year that you try to buy into RJ Barrett, he lets you down with just bad shot efficiency, bad shot taking, and turnovers. And I just don't think he does enough. He's taken some steps forward defensively, but I still don't think he does enough to improve your team at where he's being drafted, especially. People always seem to think that he's a sleeper, and every single year he lets us down. So it's not like a Jabari Smith where I think he's going to rebound from a rough year. I think he's just rough in general.
Yeah, I need to see it. Like, it's just been too long without seeing it from him, and I don't really see a path. In fact, I think he's actually more likely to get worse with guys like Hart and Quickly and Grimes and DiVincenzo who can all cut into his minutes. So, yeah, I would actually say the opposite of him having a breakout would be my guess, but you never know, I guess. Tom Balrua, what is Tobias's outlook with Harden likely leaving? Also, remember, though, Tommy, Harden does not leave in a vacuum. Somebody else comes across. Maybe 2 players. I don't know who they're going to be, so we've always got to temper that. But I would expect that if Harden does leave, most likely Harris moves up 1 spot in the offensive pecking order. He goes from a guy who's maybe not a top 100 player if Harden's there to being a guy that pushes back into the 70s and 80s, who gets an extra 2 percentage points of usage. Doesn't really change his assists or his rebounds or his steals or his blocks. It just helps him get a couple of extra shots per game, Sloan.
Yeah, Tobias is a guy who he's a talented player, but I just think that he's just not the type of guy that's going to go out and get you 30 a night, and he's not going to explode with rebounding and defensive stats. So I just don't trust him in, I'm seeing him drafted in the top 75. I don't trust him anywhere around there. A little bit later, and I think he's fine value, but I just think that he's a little bit too content being a catch and shoot guy. And I think that Maxi's going to step up. And like you said, whoever Harden gets traded for is probably going to end up with a pretty decent role. So I just don't trust Tobias Harris to be a difference maker for my team. He'd be a good ancillary piece around, the 80s or 90s, but nothing before that.
Exactly how I think. Fran asked a question about Kuminga. I gave my thoughts extensively on Kuminga earlier on, but I want to see, Sloan, if you've got any different thoughts on what you've seen from Johnny through the preseason.
So I've liked what I've seen from him. I think he's aggressive and he's shown some signs of improvement. The jump shot looks better, and I think he's definitely bulked up a little bit. He's strong, so his rebounds and maybe his defensive stats might bump up a little bit. I don't think I have him as like a breakout or a big, huge difference maker, but I am intrigued by him if the spot is right. I've drafted him late in a couple of drafts.
There's no problem doing that, but as I detailed earlier, like, he's not probably going to be the 6th man, and there are still a bunch of players there: Moody, Gary Payton, Dario Saric, either of Chris Paul or Kevon Looney coming off the bench. There's no 28-minute, 28 usage pathway clearly there for Kuminga at the moment. So have a crack, but he's running at 34% usage and playing 28 minutes a night through the preseason, which seems pretty unlikely for him to be able to maintain. He's been good, but it's also like he's not going to play ahead of Wiggins or Draymond or Steph or Clay. Like he's not playing ahead of those guys, and then it's how he works in with those bench options, and that always limits a little bit of upside, I think.
I'll tell you what intrigued me in the LOFB Bowl. I saw on FanTracks that he has center eligibility, so
that's weird.
That kind of intrigued me as a late pick. So
yeah, that does help for sure. Sean says, what do I think of Jeremy Sochan's chance at being the Spurs' third best Yahoo fantasy player behind Vassell and Wemby? Will he even start, do you think? It's hard to see where his minutes come from. It's an interesting one. Look, we don't know who's going to start between him, Trey Jones, and Keldon Johnson. I would suggest that Zach Collins is probably going to be the third guy. If Trey Jones started at point guard, I think he would have an argument to be the third best fantasy player. If Sochan and Keldon Johnson play equal minutes, Sochan will be a better player than Keldon Johnson there. But it's not hard, Sloan, I don't think, to see Sochan being that third guy. If they start him at point guard, he could be... He might sniff the top 100, but I think, Zach Collins would probably have something to say about being that third guy as well.
Yeah, I like Trey Jones a lot too. I think he's got a lot of potential in that spot. But just the versatility that you get from Sochan is just so intriguing, and it's tough to not like him as a sleeper if you get him at the right spot. If you get him in the say the 110s to 130s. I would be interested if it fit my build. But yeah, just getting the assists and the defensive stats, he's got such potential as a defender. And I think he's a real good real Popovich guy. I think Pop likes him a lot. Sochan actually did a little series of articles for Sporting News, just writing from his perspective. So we got a chance to get to know him a little bit. He's a really cool guy and seems like a really smart guy. So I'm interested, but wouldn't invest too much in him.
Carter says, yo, Piver. Great name. Do you mean Piver or do you mean Sloan? Anyway, do you think having Mobley, Claxton, and Gafford will keep you competitive in blocks with how many high blocks are available this season? He's asking you, Sloan, so what do you think? But I think yes.
Yeah, I would think so. Absolutely. I think Mobley is a future defensive player of the year candidate. He's just got such a killer instinct, and he seems wise beyond his years on the defensive side of the ball. And I think Claxton is one of the more underrated players in fantasy basketball. So Gafford, I've definitely grabbed him in a few spots. I like him a lot. I think he's one of the better sleepers this year, and he's definitely got a good role set up for him in Washington. So I don't know if he's going to put you over the top with blocks, but it looks like you're already all set with those.
Yeah, I think having those three guys who could conceivably average 2 per game, or at least average 6 amongst the three of them, puts you in a pretty good spot. One question before you go, Sloan. Ode, whatever your name is there. Why are people taking Claxton before Kessler? You did that in one of your mock drafts too. I did. Kessler has just a lot of negatives. He is a low scorer who never hits a 3, who gets no assists, who gets no steals, and has very bad free throw attempts. Yes, he can block some shots, but I just think that it becomes quite hard to build a team around him if you're going super early because of the extreme deficiencies in his game in multiple areas, whereas Claxton can be an okay steals guy. He's got a little bit of more offensive juice, and he can actually pass a little bit, which Kessler can't at this point. Do you have a differing perspective on that, Sloan?
Not really. I think I agree with you that Claxton might be a higher floor player. I think we've already seen Kessler's ceiling. And also they've added John Collins, and we don't quite know how that rotation is going to shake out fully. And we don't know for sure if Kessler's going to maintain that block rate. Claxton obviously had a huge increase in his block rate last year as well. But I think that his role is pretty secure there, and I think he's showed us for a longer amount of time that we can trust him as a defensive anchor.
Cool. Sloan, that's it. Time's up. Sorry for the delayed start in getting you in here, but thanks for jumping in and having a chat with us and all of the viewers regarding some of these fantasy basketball things, as we are like 9 days away from the start of the season, or less maybe. 8, I think.
My pleasure. Very exciting times.
All right, let's go and see how we're at with the next guy that is maybe in the room. Let's go and check if he is here. Okay. So apologies to Sloan. He was in the room and I screwed it up. And this next guy is here as well. We have got just a perfect attendance record going. If it wasn't for me screwing that last one up, Alex Reclean is back. He is here to talk fantasy basketball with me. Alex, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
All right. Now, I just had a question and I lost it, but that's okay.
I have an answer to your last question while you're pulling it up.
What?
And the answer is they shouldn't.
Here he is, the Walker Kessler truther. How's Walker Kessler's blocks looked in the preseason?
I don't spend much time or energy caring about preseason stats.
Yeah, well, see, you're always going to get differing opinions with different people because Alex is ready to have babies with Walker Kessler. Me, I'll let him slide down into the 50s. I just think there's a lot of negatives associated with him. But we want to talk another center now. Alex, as another Alex asks this question, Alex Beckman says, how realistic is it for Onyeka Okongwu to become the starting center in Atlanta?
Totally realistic. I don't know that there's a difference between realistic and saying it will happen. Capella has absolutely been falling off. Okongwu has looked good. But they've resisted making Okongwu the starter so far when, I think at least most in the fantasy community felt that he was ready for that last year. And so I don't know how much if that carries over. It's Quinn's first year with the job, so completely realistic. I want to stop short of saying I think it will happen, but 100% a realistic possibility.
Yeah, that's key. Like using words correctly, Alex, is because is it realistic to think that it could happen? Yes. Does it mean that we think it's going to happen? No. It's not like, hey, do you think that there's a chance that Miles Norris is the starting power forward for the Hawks? No, that's not realistic. There's no chance that it's going to happen unless something wild happens and wipes half the team out. Right? But if we came out and Quinn Snyder said, actually, guys, we're going to make a switch and Okongwu starting at center, we'd go, hey, okay, I get it. All right. Don't think it's going to happen, but it makes complete sense that it would happen. Right. But we also don't necessarily need Okongwu to even be the starter, especially if he starts hitting threes, because he's did that a little bit in the preseason. If they can sneak a 1 or 2 minutes for him at the 4, get 24 minutes as a backup center, then we're cooking. And then there is a trade of Capella could happen, a switch could happen, who knows. It's not just for him all about being a starter. Darius asked, do I think Jordan Poole averaged 30? And what do I think his assists will be? No, I don't think he'll average 30. I think he will come closer to it than others might think he will, but I don't think he's going to average 30. Assists, 5, maybe 6. He's a decent enough ball handler and offensive initiator that he will work his way into assists. He's not like a... let's talk about his former teammate, Klay Thompson, who can score well, but he's not a guy that's really setting guys up and running a pick and roll, but Jordan Poole is. And Jordan Poole will have those opportunities so much on this team. So I think baseline 25 and 5 is relatively reasonable, I think.
Yeah, I'd say that I've got to assume he's going to get to 5 assists. I don't know if he'll get how much higher, if much higher, but I mean, he had 4.5 in 30 minutes last year, and we've got to assume that both his minutes are going to go up and his usage are going to go up. His time touching the ball is going to go up, and it would be hard for someone who could average 4.5 and 30 with the ball in his hands more, not to just accidentally get an extra half assist. Yep. So I've got to assume it'll be at least that. 30, I agree. I would stop short of saying 30. I think people are sleeping on how much Kyle Kuzma's points could take up. I don't know that there's necessarily a robust betting market on the Jordan Poole versus Kyle Kuzma, who will lead the Wizards in points. Poole is the favorite. Poole should be the favorite. But if I were setting those betting lines, it would be a lot closer to what I perceive the current market is.
We talk about
not sure that
we talk about realistic though, Alex. Like it is realistic that both of those guys average 25 a game because Tyus Jones isn't a scorer, Daniel Gafford is not a scorer, and whether they start Bilal Coulibaly or Denny Avdia, they're not scorers either. So every shot basically is going to be, let's see what we can get for Kyle or for Jordan Poole, and then the others will sort of clean up. There's no other dynamic scores. Even if they started Corey Kispert, he doesn't generate his own shot. Delon Wright doesn't generate his own shot. Johnny Davis doesn't, but he's also now injured as well. Like who I don't kind of think who else is in the team. Anthony Gill, like
Avdia.
Yeah, like none of these guys do this stuff. Like it's not what their role is. So both honestly, again, you want to talk about realistic. If Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma average both 30 a game this season, I go, that makes sense. Look who else is around him. It's very unlikely, but they could just take every shot. They could both take 20 shots a game. That's possible too.
Yeah, I agree. Realistic, but unlikely. Both averaging 27. I don't know about likely, but like
with the way the team is set up, right? Like that's the thing you got to look at. It's not like, is this guy is a 27-point scorer, an All NBA player? No, but with who else is around on that team, then might be the way it plays out. I'm going to throw this one to you, Alex, because I don't necessarily know the answer. Trey Parker says, who would you draft in a best ball format that pays out $75,000 to the highest points scored across the season? The reason I don't answer that is because I can't play in these best ball tournaments. I'm location restricted. So I'm not going to come in here and tell you that I've sat and thought about all of this strategy for something that I've never played in and can't play in. Do you have any thoughts on this sort of thing? Now, a lot of this in these high prize pool best ball tournaments, there's a gigantic factor of luck in it. You are against thousands and thousands of people, and there is not like, here is the strategy and this is what will win. There is a lot of luck involved in that. But have you played in any of these? Do you have any experience with this sort of format?
I have not. I have mercifully, my audience is smaller than yours to the point where I've been able to basically ignore points leagues for the last, at least since my children were born. So I don't, as much as I love the concept of best ball and do a lot of it for fantasy football, I actually don't do it for fantasy basketball at all. That said, the point you're making about how this is a tournament and, you're talking about coming in first in this sort of large pool tournament, you're going to need some combination of unexpected upside to win. So as much as, the first round names are going to, whoever plays the most games of the first round picks is going to end up being the best, best ball player. What you're really going to try to be looking for is who's the player, Tyrese Maxey, Austin Reeves, who ends up performing 3-4 rounds better than we're drafting him. And I did mention those two names on purpose. I'm going to be talking to Adam King later this week about players I'm worried I'm too low on, and those two are at the top of my list. So they're good answers for this question. But granted, you're getting that from someone who hasn't played any best ball this year.
Your highest points scored across the whole season is a different sort of thing, because in some best ball things where the big prize goes to the final 3 weeks of the season, you want to stack up on maybe some young players on tanking teams who might be forced into these crazy Skylar Mays type role over the final 3 weeks of the season and start to hit there. But there's no point sitting on a guy who might not start for 3 months in a format where the points accumulate over the season. So usually in this, you want, it's pretty relatively similar to a category, guys that are going to have a chance to outperform, but also outperform early on. You want them to be able to grab them at 100, and then from week 2, they're running at top 70, and that's the way to do it. But there's just a lot of luck involved in that. And again, talking from someone who can't play in those contests, unfortunately. All right. OC, this is just a pretty standard question, so I'm going to ask you this one, Alex. What is your favorite flyer/sleeper pick later on in the draft?
Bojan, I think, is probably my answer. He's the late pick that I'm finding myself getting the most. It's not that exciting. I just feel like he should be going around pick 100, and he's usually falling to like 130 or 140. And so if you're just like being honest about who am I drafting the most late, I think it's Bojan.
Why do you think should go at 100?
I think that he's like pretty safely going to produce top 80, top 90, maybe better, as long as he's on the Pistons. His value might go down in a trade. You're making a face. You think that's overstating it?
I think that what he did last season was great, but Cade Cunningham played 10 games. So he took on a role where his usage it had been a continual downtrend, and then it spiked back up. And he is a guy that doesn't rebound, steal, block, get assists. He's a points guy who hits some threes, but that requires having a lot of shots. So if you can't contribute in other categories and you are destined to lose some shots, which I think he is, and a risk of a mid-season trade, I just don't see how he gets back to that number without a situation happening like Cade going down again all season.
A valid argument. I would counter by pointing out, even if his points go down a bit, he's still probably scoring more than most players available.
It's true.
After pick 120.
Yep.
And, points is a common category to be looking around and saying, oh man, I need help here.
He also gets to the line at a decent clip as well, above average, and shoots a really good percentage. And that is valuable. He is also currently dealing with an injury. He's 34 years of age on a team that's bad, and he might get traded. So there is quite a bit of downside in it. But you're right. If you are like, man, I need some points here. Like, what else am I picking here? Am I getting Josh Green for 8 points a game, or can I get 19 out of Boyan? Like, that's value for sure. For me, I'm looking at some. I'm just trying to take swings on guys who I feel have a chance of hitting. So, like, Kobe White's someone I'm grabbing late, but if someone gets him in round 10, I don't care. I'll go somewhere different. If I'm looking for some blocks, then I'm going to take Dereck Lively, because there's just not many of those flyer guys who might block 1.5 shots a game. It might not work. If I'm in round 14 of a draft and I'm still uncertain about Kyrie Irving's availability for the opener, I'm going to take Jaden Hardy, because he might score 20 points for 3 games to start the season if Kyrie's going to miss. I don't know if he's going to miss. Or if they trade Tim Hardaway away. There's just so many different options.
2 other late picks that are much more fun that I've taken a lot of are Dereck Lively and Shaedon Sharpe. I'm getting a lot of both of them late.
Sharpe's an interesting one to me, Alex, because I agree. If he's sitting there at 130, I'm all in. But I'm seeing him go like at 100, and I go, okay, every player that's likely to start outside of Matisse Thybulle, but even if Sharpe starts instead of Thybulle, Simons, Scoot, Ayton, and Grant, none of those are defensive first players. They're all going to be usage guys. And Sharpe, I don't know what else he does at this point that's not based on everyone else is out of the way and he's scoring. So I think if you're going up to him in round 10, I don't know how he hits that unless there is a Grant injury or Simons trade or whatever, because there's a 5th option if he does start. Like, what else is he doing that's not scoring? I guess that's part of my
I'm viewing him as an exciting mystery box.
That's fair enough.
That's really the crux of it. I don't feel like I know exactly what he is going to do or if it's going to fit my team. But the main person that like the basketball community has identified as this person is good at scouting. Schmitz got picked up by the Trailblazers, and the person that he said to draft and hold was Shaedon Sharpe. That says a lot to me. He seems super talented. He seems super exciting. And I am willing to take a 10th round pick on someone who is just a mystery box full of upside. And if it doesn't hit, if I end up dropping him, like I am okay with that at that point. Sure, I'd rather do it in the 12th, but I don't mind doing it in the 10th depending on my build or what I need at that point.
You heard it here first. Alex Reclean is recommending that you take young players who you've got no idea how they're going to produce in your draft. He's all about getting the young guys, get the rookies, the second-year guys, all the guys with unproven track records. Alex, you are co-signing off on that. Thank you for telling us that.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're right. It is all about hitting that upside. I just always try and look, where is the path super clear? It sort of is, but it sort of isn't. So yeah, but who cares?
I'm not going to pick him over a boat, but
well, legendary Family Guy reference there, Alex. That'll bring us to the end of your time on the show. You can go, or you said you're going to be on with Kingy on his show coming up, so get you there, and of course over on the old Twitter.
Yep. See you all soon.
Thanks
for having me.
All right, and now we get into our final guest. Let's see. I think this will be the first. Oh, no, I know it'll be the first time that he is on this show. Let's see if he is here and ready to go. Fingers crossed. Maybe. Yes, he is. It is the first time on this show he actually took down the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl Points League division last season. He's doing work now over for Fantasy Basketball International. Karan Talwar, welcome.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be here after consuming your content for so many years.
Yeah.
So super cool. Excited to be here.
Karan's been, do I pronounce it Karan or is it Karen?
Second one, Karan. Think of electric current without the T.
Karen. All right. So he's been following this show for a long time. Basketball Monster member for ages, seen his name around everywhere. He won the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, as I said, and now he's doing work, and you've seen him pop up a couple of times on the Fantasy Basketball International podcast over the last couple of weeks. So it is great to have you here to discuss some stuff. Liam asked, am I wearing pants or shorts? It is always shorts, mate. There is not one single incident ever where I will wear pants in my house. It is shorts every single time, even going outside. So that's a silly question, mate. Someone said, did the mic go weird? Is something going on with my mic? Are we back? Hello? Hello? I hope it's okay. Can you hear me, everybody? It looks like it's coming up on my end. Can you hear me, Karen?
I can, yep.
Huh. I wonder what people are talking about. People are saying my mic volume has dropped, but I don't know. Are we back? All right. We're back. Sorry. Okay. Andrei Ivanov, how many points producers do you have to draft in the first 8 rounds to be competitive in that category? That is a tough question because as a general rule, Karen, we look at points as an average in that category is around 18.5 to be average, but you don't want to be average. You want to be better than average. So usually you want your team to average, let's say 19.5 to 20 per game in a standard 12-team league would be a number that I think is not going to dominate every week, but be in a pretty good spot. The thing is that when you say in the first 8 rounds is you've got to be well above that. You've got to be sitting at like 22, 23 points per game, basically, because when you start drafting around 9, 10, 11, 12, you're getting guys averaging 12 points, 10 points, 14 points, and that brings your overall team average down. Now, you could just target specifically, like Alex said, Bojan Bogdanovic to keep that number up, but if you usually want to be well above average, around 22-point average, I would guess, through those first 8 rounds to be competitive in that category.
Yes, absolutely. Because it depends on who you get in the first round as well. So if you get a Jokic or a Tyrese who are typically lesser than the other 10 guys in the first round, then you'd really got to focus in on them in the second and third round if you want to be competitive. So, and points are going to go away, as you've obviously detailed a lot in your shows as well. Points are going to go away after the 4-5 rounds. So you got to be mindful that you got to be ready to pivot as well, that if you're not getting those points, then just pivot to a punt points build and try to see if you can capture the other categories, because a lot of the people are going to be chasing points in your drafts.
Yeah, that is true as well. And it's always important. We can throw out, people always ask, what are the average categories and what do you need to be competitive? But that doesn't always help you at each stage in the draft because, like we've detailed, the points disappear. So if you're not well above average, you're not going to even remain average later on because you're going to be, adding 8 points of Steven Adams later in the draft, or you might be adding a young guy who then doesn't pan out and you just can't find those points. So while it is true that you can find points off the waiver wire because everybody scores something, finding an average points player is almost impossible to find. You can find someone who scores 10 points. You can't find someone who scores 18 points regularly sitting on the waiver wire. So finding points is accurate. You can, but you can't find them in enough quantities for that to matter. All right. What a question have we... there's a few questions that are sort of repeating here, so I don't want to get into those, but this is one we haven't talked about. We haven't talked much jazz. Navzad Dabu says, can Jordan Clarkson get close to his numbers from last season, which was 25-5 on decent percentages? I am a little worried, Karan, about Clarkson's role this season.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many guards in Utah right now that need feeding, right? You got Keontae, you got Taylor Horton-Tucker, you got people that Agbaji as well. However, he fits in Sexton. I know that he's going to play his minutes, but I don't know if he's going to get back to those 20 points a game, just given the people around him now with Lowry as well from last year, and then with John Collins, and if he can have a renaissance. I would more look at him as a guy you get towards the end of your drafts as a person for a points boost, but nothing more than that, like maybe 16, 17 points, but not more than that in my opinion.
Yeah, look, I thought coming into this preseason, off-season, that he'd be locked in as the starting shooting guard, and it doesn't appear that that is 100% locked in. There's Sexton, there's Dunn, there's Horton Tucker, there's George, there's the forgotten man, Abaji. So even if Clarkson does maintain that starting role, I think his numbers from last season probably are going to be tough to get to. A mile away says, do I see Shea remaining in the top 10 this season? Like, I'm not going to say everything's guaranteed, right? Because things can drop off pretty quickly. But top 10, yeah, I think he's going to be there, Karen.
Yes, and again, in any draft, right, who you take in the first 10 or 12 it's fine, right? I mean, everyone is good there. Like any leagues I've won over the last few years, they've been about getting value at 50, 60, 70, who you're getting there who can jump up spots. So yeah, Shea, for example, this year, I mean, I think his points are going to be good as well. I don't know how much about the defensive stats can again come in this year as well compared to last year. Maybe Chet has an impact a little bit on rebounds. Don't see much else from a point scoring perspective that he impacts. But again, you can't go wrong with him in picking him in the top 5. Just the same with Tyrese, same with JoJo, same with Jokic as well.
Yeah, look, he might finish outside the top 10. Shea took a big leap in steals, blocks, field goal percentage, free throw percentage, and scoring last season. He might take more threes this season, which will drop his field goals. What if he goes from 91 back to 84 from the line? It's all possible. What if he doesn't get as many block shots and the rebounds drop? Like, he might be the 11th best player. Oh, well, it can happen, right? These things happen relatively regularly where a guy goes from 4th to 9th to 12th to 1st or whatever. It is all over the place, but don't overthink it too much. We're still taking him in that area. Jack says, why does the Australian rugby team suck so bad? I don't know, mate. I don't follow rugby, nor do I care. Let's go to this one about Victor Wembanyama. He's going early second round. Wow, okay. We talked about him about, an hour ago or so on this show and I don't remember who because I've had so many people on here. Wembanyama, I reckon 4 days ago, I got him in round 4. He was going consistently in the 40s. He's looked awesome. And now, do you oppose, Curran, him going at the start of round 2, early round 2?
From a purely projection standpoint, maybe, just because that may be like his best case, like his roof could be like a top 20 this year. But from a fun standpoint, right, that's the second part of fantasy, right? If you really want to have fun this year, you want to watch Victor do things, you want to just have the biggest prospect since LeBron or maybe ever in the league. So I would then do it, right? Because it's just a question of what's important to you. So I don't mind it in the second round. I would like for him to come to me in the third round. That would be ideal. I know he's not coming to me in the 4th round in most drafts now, if they were to draft from today onwards. So that's how I would look at it.
There's no way he's going to the 4th round at this point. And then Ja Morant, who I'm assuming is not the real Ja Morant, says, how would I value Wembanyama in Dynasty? Well, he's not going below pick 3 in any sort of Dynasty league. Like, you could make an argument that he goes number 1, I reckon, Curran. Like, Jokic and Doncic go 1-2 usually. Maybe Shea goes in there, but hard to see how Wembanyama's falling out the side of the top 3.
Yeah, so I've joined 3 Dynasty leagues this year. The one in which he fell the most was the one which we did like 2 months ago, the draft. In that, he went at 6. I was shocked at that. I mean, I was 7. I was hoping that by chance he falls, but he didn't. But in the latest one I've done, he's gone at 3.
Yep.
So yeah, next year I'm pretty sure he's likely gonna go at 1 from next year.
Yeah, I would think that even in redraft leagues he'll be a first round player next year is my guess. I don't think that's too controversial. Chris Metcalf says, is it Labrova? And I'm just, let's translate that for the non-hip cool kids out there. Do you think that this is the year that LeBron falls off and we see some decline in his production, Karen?
I thought that it would be 3 years ago after his first injury.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's no way I'm going to bet against that, man. But in terms of from a fantasy production standpoint, if he gets to 65 games even, right, it's going to be a big surprise.
Yep.
So I wouldn't expect that. I would be happy to look at him in the 3rd and 4th, if I can get him there, because his points and assists are elite still, right? And you do find that very hard to get in drafts. So I would be okay to take that. Also, with depending on who I've got in the first 3 picks, have I got quote unquote safer players, or have I got a little bit guys who don't have that much of an injury risk? Then I would be more willing to take a LeBron. But if I don't, then yes, he falls down.
I think he fell to me at like 42 in a mock the other day. I did like those 14 mock drafts in a row, and I didn't get LeBron. I didn't consider him in any mock drafts until the final one, and he fell to me at, well, I think the first pick of round 4 in a 14-team league, which is 43 actually, or around that mark, 42, 43. And I think that's probably the right area for him. In a points league, it's a little bit more debatable because I still think he's a top 10-ish player per game. But he's 39. How do you have that much faith given the lower body injuries over the last couple of years? And the older you get, the longer it takes for you to get back into the full health at that age. That's just how things work. All right. I think this one is an interesting question. Raptors fan says, Drew Holiday or Tyler Hero in a points league? Because in the past, Curran, we would have just said Drew Holiday is pretty easily ahead of Tyler Hero, but points league changes the discussion a little bit. The Boston situation changes things a little bit. We had John Corrales on earlier saying he thinks that there's a chance that Drew comes off the bench. Hero won't come off the bench. How are you viewing the comparison between those two?
Yeah, I mean, it depends again if it's Yahoo points or ESPN points, because there's a little bit of a difference there. But in terms of from a this year standpoint, I'm bullish on Hero. I think he in one of Aaron King's threads that he's done with our guys, like I have Hero as one of mine. Feel like he can in this year without the aura of Dame coming in, he could get back to that 25-5 level. His defensive stats aren't going to be there. But in terms of from an upside standpoint, they're both going around the same area, maybe like Holiday a little earlier. From an upside standpoint, I feel like Hero has more in jumping that up by 20 spots. So I would lean Hero in just given that Holiday is surrounded by a lot of people and a lot of players in Boston. It's a new setting. How does the coach use him? All that as well, the uncertainty of that potentially. So I would lean on Hero.
Yeah, I think for a points league format, I would be taking Hero in that situation as well. Free Key says, is Caleb Martin almost Eastern Conference MVP? Is he Eastern Conference Finals MVP? Is he a 12-team category league player? I don't think I have seen Caleb Martin get drafted in any draft that I have done. Have you?
No, I have not. I mean, if you do, it's one of the most boring picks. So towards the end of your draft. So I mean, in 16-team leagues, 14-team maybe, but no, I've not seen him in 12 either.
Yeah, I don't. Look, late last season he started. He wasn't really worth that spot. It's just there's no upside really in it. I don't think he's worth it. Asteroid says he did a Kawhi for Paul George trade. He got Kawhi. These guys go really close to each other in most drafts, Karan. I don't really think there's much debate that Kawhi is a better player than Paul George, but he also doesn't have Paul George, whilst had injuries, he doesn't have the specter of the rests as much as Kawhi. How do you balance the value of those two versus how you might look at their durability? Yeah,
so for me, in this person saying that it's regular settings, right? So that means like three bench spots.
Yeah.
In a deeper setup, like for example in the LOFB bowl, like I would be more than willing to have Kawhi earlier on, just because there's 8 spots of bench. But in a 13-1, I would still lean Kawhi, but I don't feel like he lost that trade at all, because Kawhi could still play 55 games even, right? And that's a win over Paul George playing 65, just given that Kawhi is better on a per game basis. So I would view it with that. Just know your settings as well, and just know who else you've drafted around you. Like this person, does he have more injury risk on his team?
Yeah.
Right? Does he have a Zion on his team? Then maybe I wouldn't do that trade. But depends on who else I have on my roster as well and how deep my league is.
I think that I generally would just want to bet on Kawhi over Paul George, but I still think Paul George is getting a little bit undervalued. But anyway, you got Kawhi and Karan. That is it. We are done with your segment, but I'm also done with this show. So thank you for coming on. You can check out Karan over on Fantasy Basketball International podcasts. Thanks for jumping on the show for the first time.
Thanks, Josh. Pleasure being here.
And guys, we have made it. We are 3 hours in, 3.5 hours in, actually. My back is killing me. My voice is cracking. I'm thirsty, but I got to as many of your questions as I can. Remarkably, I think I am going to do another podcast today. We'll see how I feel. I think I'm going to do another one. We'll see what it's going to be on. But I hope you guys enjoyed this chance to throw your questions my way over these last 3.5 hours as we are 7 or so days, 8 days away from the start of the NBA season. Follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app, and if you are here on YouTube live, thumb it up. If you're not live, thumb it up anyway. Ring the bell, subscribe, and get strapped in for a big season of fantasy basketball content. Guys, we are done here. Finally. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Whoops, wrong button.